Okay, so, yep, we are really doing this. I don't know what got into me to make this video, but damn it, I did. I went through every single year of the NFL's entire history, which is well over 100 years of individual research, and I have compiled this into one grandiose video for your pleasure. I basically just thought, you know what, throughout my years of doing research and slamming my head into my keyboard, just up late at night doing research on random things about NFL lore, I have so much information in this cabeza of mine that I might as well just put it into a video. So, yeah, that's what this is. This is the entire history of the NFL explained. And if you're a newer NFL fan or you just want to know more about NFL lore, this video is for you. It will always be here for you, and hopefully you can come back to it in the future, fall asleep to it or whatever. But yeah, this is gonna be a long one, so buckle up. And we're gonna have a friend joining us, if that's okay with you. He's nice, I promise. But yeah, that's enough stalling. This is gonna be a long one, but I guarantee you that you will learn multiple new things that you have never heard before, whether you're a new NFL fan or experienced. So without further ado, that's enough stalling. All right, I'll shut up and let's get right into this video, shall we? In the beginning, it was all dark, but the NFL was formed in an Ohio car dealership, technically, and that's why the Hall of Fame is there, if you ever wondered that. But yeah, it basically started with a bunch of teams that were like, hey, I want to keep playing football, but I also am like 23 now, which is elderly in the modern age, because back then it was basically college football that dominated the game. But yeah, they started playing against each other, and all of a sudden, the NFL as we know it was formed. And holy shit, man, the first few years of the NFL, hell, the first like 20, 30 years of this Paleolithic era of NFL football was so crazy, dude. The first season, officially, was in 1920, and the league was called the APFA and featured the Decatur Staleys and the Chicago Cardinals, who are the two oldest franchises that are now the Bears and the Cardinals. The Cardinals haven't won anything, by the way, just thought I'd throw that out there. We also saw the Moline Universal Tractors, that was an NFL team. The Chicago Tigers were also here, but they would no longer be in Chicago for much longer, and who could forget the Dayton Triangles? With Frank Bacon and Dick Averill. The NFL is basically just rugby at this point, kind of. I mean, the Dayton Triangles had Al Mart, who had 28 completions in all of 1920. So I guess if you want to be super nice, the Triangles were actually the NFL's first passing team, sort of. But yeah, there were also future coaching legends playing football during this time, like Jimmy Conzelman and Curly Lambeau, and they were pretty good too. But in the first season of the NFL, again, technically it wasn't called the NFL, but the Akron Pros took home the championship in 1920. God, what a great game to be at. It's one I'll never forget. He thinks he can escape, but he's wrong. He's simply incorrect. He can try, but he won't succeed. I'll tell you that. Anyways, the Staleys won the chip in 21 with George Halas, but then in 1922, what do you know about the Bulldogs dynasty? In 22 and 23, the Bulldogs, the Canton Bulldogs, went back-to-back, and not only back-to-back, but had undefeated seasons. 2 championships in a row, never lost a game, and their best player was their coach, Guy Chamberlain. And there was so much about the game that was normal back then that just wouldn't even come remotely close to flying nowadays. Players were regularly knocked out cold or seriously injured, and crowds didn't even flinch. This was a barbaric type of game, and also the crowds would routinely swarm the field to protest calls or celebrate touchdowns, completely interrupting play. And there was no real security, and even more crazy, players back then went by fake names, so their colleges wouldn't find out they were getting paid to play. So that's another reason why the record books are a little bit screwed up. But yes, the game was way more physical back then. They were only wearing leather helmets, there was almost no padding whatsoever, substitutions were restricted, and pretty much every single guy had another job in like the factory or was growing wheat somewhere. Football was just a thing for fun, and Yeah, even the absolute craziest part, can you believe this? But in the 1920s, they would even play football on baseball stadiums. I mean, what kind of poverty franchise would play a football game on a baseball field? Crazy shit. But I want to talk about some of the teams that folded during this time. Well, we'll discuss that even more in detail later on, but the St. Louis All-Stars folded after this year with 2 players on the roster, apparently. One being Dick King. Sounds like a guy you don't want to be alone in a sauna with, but you know, I'm not judging your preferences, okay? This is a safe space. Safe space. Anyways, in 1924, the first 1,000-yard passing season happened, and it was by Curly Lambeau. Yeah, I'm not even joking. From 1920 to 1949, Lambeau was the head coach and general manager of the Packers and played for a while for them too, and he'll win a few chips in a bit, so do not forget his name. He's one of the main characters. Now, you wouldn't believe this, but the Bulldogs fucking three-peated. They got bought out and were renamed, but it was the same players that dominated as before. Wookie Roberts, Hogue Workman, and Dick Wolf. And also Guy Chamberlain was still here. So nice. There's a little three-peat, but yeah, no one really remembers this this era for a reason. It was just not really football. Like I said, it was closer to rugby than anything. But still, you beat who's in front of you, and this was an incredible accomplishment. But in 1925, one could argue the NFL got their first real superstar when Red Grange debuted. Now, he only left after 1 year, so that's kind of tough, but he was great at football, and he really was the NFL's first star. He brought a ton of huge media attention to keep the league relevant. But even when he was gone for that 1 year, the NFL got a replacement superstar in Ernie Nevers, who also was absolutely phenomenal and could do everything. So these 2 players, among others, were huge founding fathers into making the NFL what it is today. But the 1925 season went crazy, so anytime you see a TikTok saying what was like your favorite season of all time, please bring up 1925. People would love that. But anyways, the story of this year was the Pottsville Maroons and the Chicago Cardinals. Now, I have talked about this in greater detail in other videos, but it was a very interesting scenario because back then there were few rules with scheduling specifically, and basically, the winner of the championship wasn't decided by a championship game, but it was decided by who had the most wins at the end of the regular season. And by the end of the season, the Maroons, who had beaten the Cardinals, had the most wins. But the Cardinals said, you know what, fuck it. We're going to schedule a few games against high schoolers and other garbage teams to get more wins and secure the chip. So the scheduling was just going crazy because you had teams like the Duluth Kellys who went 0-3 on the entire season, while the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets went 13-7. They played 20 fucking games while another team played just 3. And Pro Football Reference says that the Kellys had 1 fucking player. Please, somewhere, there's gotta be Duluth Kelly game film, man. I need to see it. Anyways, yeah, this was a wild season, and the Cardinals ended up getting the championship because they had the most wins, but the people of Pottsville did not like this at all. And legend has it, they placed a curse on the Cardinals that is still standing to this very day. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that they are cursed, so I believe this one. I believe it. And hey, finally, another team won it that wasn't the Bulldogs. In 26, the Yellow Jackets won it with, Guy Chamberlain. Yeah, he's here now. Yeah, he was just absolutely dominant during this time. And this season, we also got possibly the worst team ever debuting with the Louisville Colonels. They had 0 points in their entire franchise's history and folded after just 3 games. Yeah, Coach Lenny Sachs couldn't get the job done, shockingly. But the league was getting real teams in place now that you probably recognize, as the Giants are here and they won a championship in 1927. But in 28, again, we got the rise of the Green Bay Packers. Now, they weren't amazing this year, but they also had a punting record broken that was set and will never, ever, ever be touched again, because punter Vern Llewellyn, I don't know, man. He punted 136 times this season, and That is just untouchable. Now, because it was in the old days, these records aren't like officially kept, but the record right now is 114. He absolutely shattered it in a shorter scheduled season. So, just crazy shit, man. In 1929, Red Grange is back again, and now he's with the Chicago Bears, but he had come off a serious knee injury, and he wasn't the player that he said he once was, according to him, but he was still the NFL's biggest star, and he led the league in rushing yards, but the Green Bay Packers won it in 29. They won the championship, so the Bears weren't excited about that. Then they won in 30. Then again in 1931. I'm sorry you have to endure this this beginning, Bears fans. It'll get better from here. Just look at this logo of the Providence Steamrollers who folded after 1931. Sorry, you needed a palate cleanser, and this image is just crazy to me. But the Packers-Bears rivalry truly began. It started with George Halas versus Curly Lambeau, two guys who, again, were instrumental to the founding of the NFL. George Halas was a player, Curly Lambeau a player, but both would become basically future owners and guys who called the shots for their entire team in every regard. And the Bears got revenge in 1932. They won a chip and then went back-to-back in 33. But how, you may ask? Well, they had a man, nay, a laboratorical creature, playing for them now. I love Bronco Nagurski, okay? There is just no one man that defines early football more than Bronco, okay? I mean, again, his name is just Bronco Nagurski, so if you haven't heard of the guy, let me nerd out here for a minute, okay? Because trust me, I know ball here. If the word testosterone was a human, it'd be Bronco Nagurski. He made multiple All-Pro teams, and there is film of him winning a wrestling championship out there. The dude was smacking motherfuckers, and he won multiple chips in 2 different sports. He was a fucking world heavyweight champion on the side while he was playing football. So, yeah, man, shout out to Chris Willis and his book Bronco, the legendary story of the NFL's greatest two-way fullback. I highly recommend if you want to know more, but he was just an enigma of a football player. And in 1932, he came up huge in the championship in a game that technically was the first NFL playoff game, and it was moved to be indoors because of the weather. But Nagurski ended up throwing the game-winning touchdown to Red Grange, which is crazy, but this actually changed the game rules, as after this game, the forward pass was basically introduced because you had to do a drop back to throw a pass. But yeah, this ended up being changed, and also later an incompletion would be changed from being a 5-yard penalty to none. Could you imagine if every incompletion was 5 yards back now? That's just insane. But just one more Bronco story, because my favorite one ever is still when he broke through 3 tackles on his way to the end zone. Just ran over dudes. Again, this guy was bigger, faster, stronger than everyone on the field, but he ran into the wall at the end and came off the field and said, "That last guy hit me harder than I've ever been hit." Literally, this guy was doing side quests while also being an NFL legend. Just, if I could give this guy modern technology and things like that, he would be possibly the best player ever, honestly. Anyways, the 1934 championship game would be played between the Bears and the Giants. The Giants, though, ended up getting the advantage in this game, and Bears fans were very upset about this because they switched to basketball sneakers in the fourth quarter to get better traction on a very icy field, and they ended up coming back from behind to win the game 30-13, and Halas and the Bears were furious. But sadly, the Bears would fall off a bit because Bronco Nagurski's career would succumb to injuries. He had a lot of hip problems and also had hip surgery in 1935. And this was back when surgery was, here's a cigarette, sir, just inhale it a few times and then close your eyes for the lobotomy. So, we get to 1936, where the first NFL draft ever happened. And the first pick ever was Jay Berwanger. And he never played football, which is actually very common for back in the day because, again, everyone would rather work at a steel mill than play football. And the second pick would go on to play 3 years, and the third pick was William Shakespeare. The fourth pick was Dick Crane, too. I mean, what the fuck was this, dude? But yes, it's just back to the same old things. The Packers and Bears are trading off winning chips, and the Packers won it in 36 after the Skins declined home field advantage in the championship game, interestingly. But in 37, they would get their revenge and win the chip too after they drafted rookie quarterback Sammy Baugh, who changed everything for Washington. He'd go on to become one of the greatest players of all time, and still to this very moment, it's hard to make an argument against him not being the best all-around football player possibly ever, because the forward pass, again, was still not completely instituted into the league at all, but Baugh wasn't even really a quarterback. He was everything. He made 3 All-Pro teams, basically, it was called All-NFL back then, as a halfback, and he also was the best punter in the league, and in that championship game, though, he still threw for 335 yards, which is like the equivalent to 600 nowadays, and they won it 28-21. And also for reference on just how much of an outlier Baugh was, even for just this specific game, he went 18 for 33 on passes, and all Bears quarterbacks combined went 8 for 31, and that was like normal. The Bears had Hall of Fame quarterback Sid Luckman, and Luckman himself said that Sammy Baugh was the greatest competitor he ever played against, saying that Baugh was the best. Nobody is ever going to equal him. Not anybody. In 1938, we also got some interesting lore, I suppose, as Mel Hein, a center for the Giants, technically won the first ever MVP. It wasn't 100% official, but he was the best player on the best team. And that sort of criteria has stood to a large extent even today, and the Giants would go on to win the chip this year. And in 1939, I get some time to talk about the teams that folded, okay? Finally, because, oh, man, I don't understand who was naming some of these teams, dude. Some of the teams that have folded to this point are the Tornadoes, like I said, the Triangles before, the Eskimos, and the Stapletons. Like, guys, what are we doing here? The Stapletons? Okay. And at this point, 49 teams in total have folded, completely gone out of the league, never to return. But also, the NFL had become way more popular, as the Packers won another chip in 1939 to end it off, and it really was the Big Four at this point. The Bears, the Packers, the Skins, and sometimes the Giants. So these 4 teams, who are all still in the NFL today, were running the league back then. And in 1940, the Bears, led by Sid Luckman, their best quarterback ever, made the championship game and were playing against Washington, where one of the most iconic games in sports history, honestly, would be played. So in 1940, they actually lost to Washington a few weeks prior to this championship game 3-7, but felt like they got robbed by the referees, and George Halas was not very happy with this. So George Marshall, the owner for the Skins, said the Bears are quitters and crybabies, and George Halas did basically what is now popular for all coaches to do, and motivate their players with revenge. And boy, did they get it. And they should have gotten it too, because George Marshall is an absolute piece of shit. I mean, he is the most racist man to ever exist in NFL lore. He was very, very pro-segregation. He was the last person in sports to integrate teams. And when Marshall died in 1969, his will stated that none of his estate was to go to any institution that wanted to integrate schools. I mean, just an absolute piece of shit. So thankfully, the Bears distributed some karma and justice, and they won the game 73-0. Do you know how hard that is to not score a single point when the entire game is garbage time? And yeah, this was and will forever be the biggest blowout in NFL history. And the Bears with the T formation just rolled through them. And Sammy Baugh was benched after 2 interceptions, but you know, I'm sure it was a logical decision, and their backup came in and oh no! Phil Cock, really? 5 picks? And the Bears just kept it going. In 1941, they won back-to-back, and it was still just the Packers and the Bears. But the Packers had a weapon of their own. In 1942, Don Hutson, their technical, I guess, receiver, had an MVP year and still possibly the biggest statistical anomaly of a season ever. I feel like I'm saying the word like ever, and I'm using these buzzwords all the time, but I'm serious, dude. This just doesn't happen, okay? Back then, the wide receiver position was not even really a thing, but still, he had 74 receptions, 1,211 yards, and 17 touchdowns. That is unbelievable. By the way, just for reference, again, 1,211 yards seems like nothing today, but in his second year in the league, Don Hudson led the league in receiving yards with 536, which was a lot, and he doubled it this season. He led the league in receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, receiving yards per game, scrimmage yards, and just everything. He made 8 straight All-Pro teams. And in 11 games in 1942, because again, this was just 11 games, he did all of that. And by the end of his career, he retired after just 11 seasons with 99 receiving touchdowns, a record which stood for 40 years. There was nobody to compare to him in his era. If you want to look at Elroy Hurst and guys like that, you can make some comparisons, but there was just no second place man, honestly. He retired after 1945 and is still a statistical anomaly to look back on. And an 8-time All-Pro, 2-time MVP, and 3-time champion. Absolute legend. But in 1942, Sammy Baugh got revenge over the Bears, and they won another chip. So again, this is just a 4-team league. But in 1943, things got a little bit complicated, because believe it or not, there was a world war, which did impact life, which is kind of crazy. And the league was super weak during this time, but it remained the Bears, Packers, Skins, and Giants. But the war hit the Bears harder than the Packers, and George Halas specifically was also gone to the war after 1942. But in 1943, holy shit, Bronco Nagurski came back at the age of 35, and again, after a hip surgery, he joined the Bears, scored in the championship game, and won one more chip on his way out. God, I love that dude. But also in 1943, Sammy Baugh had a game where he had 4 picks, on defense, like he intercepted the other quarterback 4 times, had an 81-yard punt, and went for 4 touchdowns on offense. So just casual stuff, but still, the Bears won the league in 1943, and again, it was just a coin flip between the Bears, Packers, Giants, and Skins. Now, 1944 was really the first year where things were different because of the war, and there were 2 winless teams this season, one of them being the Tigers, who folded after the season and were led by Charlie McGibney, who had a 20.8% interception percentage, and the fucking 1944 Card Pit team. Probably the worst team ever. So because of the war, teams ended up merging together. The Cardinals and Steelers merged, which created Card Pit, and also, famously, the Steelers and Eagles merged, creating the Steagles. But in my Cardinals video, my quote was, "They are an abomination to the likes of which God had no hand in creating," and I don't think I can say it any better than that, because this team just had nothing going for them. They had a minus 220-point differential, which meant they lost their games by 30 on average. They had the 3rd lowest completion percentage in NFL history at 33.7, and they did not win a game either. We now moved to 1945, where, just for reference, the average passer rating was about 51%. Just completing over 50% of your passes was pretty great. And Sammy Baugh this year had a 70.3 completion percentage. Baugh's 45 season was just so ahead of its time, it was crazy. He had 182 attempts, averaged 9 yards per pass for 1,669 yards, and a 109.7 passer rating, which is insanity. Now, in 1946, things get a bit dark because the NFL technically allowed black players back into the league, as they had effectively been banned since 1927, which is not something that's really easily publicly accessible, but it did pretty much happen. And again, people like George Marshall were huge in allowing that to go on for so long. But with George Halas's return from the war, things changed, and he went back to coaching the Bears, and they won another chip in 1946 with the usual guys of Sid Luckman, who led the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns, and Dick Schweidler. Sorry, there's just so many old dudes named Dick back then. But in 46, the Bears went back to back, and in 47, is that... Am I reading that right? The Cardinals won a chip? Yeah, the Cardinals won a chip this year. Their last ever. The Maroons were not happy with this, but basically their owner sacrificed his life for this chip, and they spent more money than any team in the league and ended up getting a star-studded backfield led by Charlie Trippi, and they won the chip. But in 48, the Eagles, the team they beat, got their revenge, and they drafted Chuck Bednarik in 1949 as well, and went back-to-back both seasons, with running back Steve Van Buren also being an amazing player during this time, as he led the league in rushing yards in 49, and the Eagles were here to stay for a bit. Now we get to 1950, where essentially the NFL bought the All-American Football Conference, which was a rival pro football league that operated from 1946 to 49, and technically also folded after the season. So this would mean that teams like the 49ers, the Browns, and Colts would come to the NFL. And specifically in year number 1, the Browns, the fucking Browns, dominated. Paul Brown, the guy leading the team, was an innovator beyond his years. He did so much to change the league in terms of communicating with his quarterback, the way that film was used, practice regimes, everything. He did so much. He was also just a genuinely good guy, as he didn't give a shit about your race or whatever, as they dominated with Otto Graham, Marion Motley, so many dudes. And the Browns had also technically 5-peated, which we'll get to, but in 2 different leagues. The main reason for this, though, was Otto Graham, the quarterback. And yes, I say he was a quarterback, but again, this wasn't the same position that we know today. He was effectively just a wildcat running back. It took 70 years for Cam Newton to break his QB rushing touchdown record, but he was amazing and a founding father for the quarterback position. And in 1951, the Browns, after winning the chip in 50, would have a rematch against the Rams in the championship game. But this time, the Rams put an end to their dominance, as Norm Van Brocklin at quarterback and Elroy Crazy Legs Hurst at wideout would beat the Browns. But the Rams wouldn't win for a long time, and the Browns, they stayed around. And yeah, things just keep being super weird, because in 1952, the Lions won the championship with Bobby Lane, and then they repeated in 1953, so I don't know what else to say. It was so confusing. During this time, the Browns and the Lions were the dominant teams in the NFL, but Otto Graham won back-to-back league MVPs and was pissed off, so in 54, the Browns destroyed the Lions in the championship game. Again, I'm skipping over the regular season a lot because records are incomplete during this time for the most part, and game footage is pretty much impossible to find, except for championships. So, like I said, in that championship, the Browns won 56-10, and Bobby Lane had 0 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, while Otto Graham had 6 total touchdowns on just 9 completions. And the Browns' dominance continued. I mean, this was beyond dominance. This was just conquering. The Browns won 10 straight division titles at this point. Again, this is still a little bit finicky because there's 2 different leagues, but the Browns won their 3rd title since being in the league, and Otto Graham technically won another league MVP, again, still unofficial, but that made him the first 3-time MVP in NFL history. But finally, the Browns would get some competition to their dynasty. In 1956, the Giants were back, and Frank Gifford is easily the best player in the league, or at least up there with Otto Graham, because he led the league as a non-quarterback in yards per game, and he was an all-purpose player, too. He had 800 rushing yards, 600 receiving yards. He led the league in scrimmage yards, and the Giants annihilated the Bears 47-7 off of Gifford's 161 yards. So surely at this point the Browns are dead, right? I mean, Otto Graham is phasing out of the league. Paul Brown's getting up there in age. No. They drafted the best player possibly in NFL history. In 1957, the Browns got Jim Brown, and he won the first official MVP. So that's great. And also he was the rookie of the year. He was a fucking rookie, and he won the MVP. Yeah, we'll talk about him more in a second, but the Browns fell short and lost to the Lions in an utter obliteration. So Bobby Lane did it again. I mean, he was the only thing standing between the Browns and seemingly, like, owning the entire decade. But then they traded him. They traded away Bobby Lane! And the legend goes, on his way out, or in the locker room specifically, he said, you know what, fine, trade me, fuck you. You won't win anything for 50 years, and he placed a curse on the Lions. And what do you know, but 50 years later, the Lions went winless. So the question still remains, are the Lions cursed today? And, you know what, I'm gonna say yes. Yes, they are. We then move on to 1958, which is a year that again can be argued to be the most important, if not the cornerstone of NFL football today. Now, we start by talking about Jim Brown because he was not okay? I mean, this guy was decades beyond his opponent's skill level. He led the league in rushing yards every year of his 9-year career except one season. He finished top 3 in MVP 6 times, was an All-Pro 8 times, and his 58 season was his best of his career. He had 1,527 yards rushing and averaged 127 yards per game as a fullback. And he did this in 12 games, by the way. And he won the MVP again, on his way to having perhaps the most dominant career in NFL history. And this wasn't even his best sport. But the NFL was creeping into baseball during this time, as becoming potentially America's favorite sport. But one of the games that changed this entirely was the championship game between the Colts and the Giants, which is famously called the greatest game ever played. But more importantly than the game is the players that were in this game. Yeah, Johnny Unitas is here now, bitch, and he's here to fuck shit up, okay? He was drafted by the Steelers as a 9th-round pick, was cut, and eventually made the Colts roster. Again, this guy was a huge underdog of a human, but he made the team and won the starting job in 56, but in 57, he finally broke out, leading the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns, as well as passer rating. Again, as basically a rookie that was never even supposed to make the NFL. So he was really one of, if not the first player that had people around the league starting to value efficiency because of Johnny Unitas and his dominance. And for the next decade plus, Unitas was a top 3 quarterback at the very least. But watching this game back, you can see why people started to fall in love with football, because it was really just entertaining. Johnny Unitas was, he had a bit of a funky drop back in this game specifically because the field was dog shit, but you can squint your eyes a bit and see the modern quarterback. There's so many plays in this game that are staples today. Obviously just, the regular halfback dive, but the play action was even being used, and offenses were becoming more advanced by the season. And all game long there was suspense, especially in the fourth quarter. It was a crazy game. It was the perfect game for the NFL to have broadcasted around the country. And there was even a point in the game where the broadcast feed cut out, so to buy some time, they had an employee run onto the field and cause a scene, which bought enough time to get the game back on. And the Colts ended up winning on an Alan Amici touchdown run in overtime. 23-17, which was the first overtime championship game until we got plenty of time, okay? I mean, he's excited to get to that point, but we're hours away. I'm gonna be taking some breaks in this video. This is a long one, man. I'm telling you, these videos are not easy to record. So also, I just wanted to take a second to shout out my Patreon, I guess. If you're still watching this video at this point, you're probably gonna finish it. So I have a lot of exclusive content on the Patreon, so please go check it out. Just throw me a buck or something if you want to get a ton of free videos over there, ad-free as well. So check it out too, and look into my YouTube membership as well. So just thanks for supporting me, guys, because videos like this, I'm sure if you're watching it, there's probably some bloaters in it. The NFL does not make it easy to monetize these. So just saying, if you wanted to help me out, all good if not, but yeah, back to the video. So we now enter the 1959 season where, I mean, you might be taken aback by this news, but in the 12th round, Dick Wood was drafted. He'll be back later. If you know, you know. Anyways, also just to talk a little bit more about the greatest game ever played, it was also stacked with legendary figures, as the Colts were coached by Weeb Ewbanks, who would go on to be an amazing coach for the Jets as well, but the Giants' defensive coordinator was Tom Landry, who would soon leave for the Cowboys' head coaching job, and their offensive coordinator was Vince Lombardi, who would head to Green Bay. And both are going to be main characters for a while as well, so yeah, man, this was just an incredible game that really made sure that the NFL was here to stay. But in 1959, the Giants and Colts met again, and this was a bit of a unique year for many reasons, one of which being that the NFL commissioner Burt Bell, who probably is the most well-liked commissioner in the history of the game, passed away with a heart attack, and he ended up not being able to see a lot of the changes he instituted in the league. But Johnny Unitas won the MVP, and the Colts just absolutely laid waste to the NFL this year. They weren't immortal, hell, they didn't even have the best record in the league, but they dropped a 30 bomb on the Giants in the championship game, and the Colts dynasty looked to be competing with the Browns as well. And I just keep saying this, but I swear 1960 was, again, one of the biggest years that changed pro football as we know it, because the AFL is here. The American Football League, and the NFL has a rival league all of a sudden. Led by guys like Lamar Hunt and Al Davis, they had a new brand of football, okay? Not everything's gonna be a fullback dive. We're airing that bitch out, and we're opening the field up. They had a lot of different rules to the NFL, and some of the notable teams that were in the AFL were the Titans, the Broncos, the Cowboys, Bills, Patriots, Chargers, Raiders. So many teams that would eventually become NFL staples were playing in this rival league, but things probably would have been a bit different in terms of how the AFL and NFL would coexist if Burt Bell didn't pass away. But with new commissioner Pete Rozelle, he did not fuck with the AFL. Let's say that for the very least. But during this time, the AFL was just thought of as less than the NFL, basically, and for this next 10 years of time where the AFL and the NFL are separate. They would merge in 1970, but until that time, I'm going to talk about each league and games and players individually. So just making that a little bit simple for you, I guess. But yeah, in 1960, the Oilers won the first AFL chip with George Blanda. Oh, where do I even start with my boy George Blanda? I mean, I similarly to like Bronco Nagurski, God, he's just such a fun player to look back on. I will nerd out about him later on, but meanwhile, in the NFL, the Cowboys didn't win a fucking game. 0 wins for the Dallas Cowboys. All right, well, that's fantastic. But also, even better for the Cowboys, the Eagles were great. So I'm sure Dallas fans love this season. Yeah, Chuck Bednarik was still playing football, and the Eagles won the chip. But before that, versus the Giants, Chuck Bednarik landed a hit on Frank Gifford and knocked him unconscious. He was carried off of a stretcher, and he would go on to be diagnosed with deep brain trauma and retired early. Now, he didn't have any symptoms of CTE specifically, but yeah, this was normal for back then. But this wasn't the only big hit of the season, because earlier on in Packers land, Ray Nitschke, one of the best linebackers ever, got hit with a 1,000-pound steel tower in fucking practice. He was fine and ended up going through the rest of the practice, but he had a bolt mark on his helmet now, which is honestly one of like the most badass things ever. But he was an irreplaceable piece for the Packers, who would play the Eagles in the championship game. With old-ass Norm Van Brocklin, though, the Eagles won it after one last stop by Chuck Bednarik. And this Eagles team, which is also one of like the worst to ever win it, they were just a bunch of old guys, but they managed to pull it off. And this would be Vince Lombardi's last playoff loss of his career for the Packers. Again, do you know how insane that is? That's his last loss. But in 1962... the federal government forced George Marshall to integrate his team, and he was still fighting against it, which led to a really sad and unfortunate situation, where in 1962, the Skins took unanimous first overall pick Ernie Davis, and he was a college football Hall of Famer, one of the best backs to ever play college football, but they didn't want him on the team because George was just racist and Ernie obviously did not want to play for them. So Ernie was traded to the Browns to join Jim Brown, who was still in his prime, and tragically, Ernie Davis never got to play with Jim. He had leukemia and never played a single game, passing away at just the age of 23, which is one of the biggest tragedies in NFL history of a player that never was. And in AFL land, the Raiders won one game. All right, that's enough. It's enough AFL research for a bit. Going back to the NFL, yeah, the Packers dynasty is back, and Vince Lombardi is that guy. In 61 and 62, the Packers went back-to-back, and 62 specifically was one of the greatest teams of all time. I mean, they were just loaded. Hall of Famers in Bart Starr, Paul Hornung, and Jim Taylor, and Don Hudson at wide receiver. I'm kidding. He retired like 20 years ago, but you know, if you were asleep, maybe you'd think that that's true. Possibly. Anyway, they beat the Giants in both championship games, so that wasn't ideal for them, but Vince Lombardi was one of, if not the greatest coaches ever at this point, and he reinvented everything the way Paul Brown did, basically. Film, practices actually being practiced, recruiting being the best motivator ever. He was obsessed with his craft, and George Halas did not appreciate that. He was not a fan of this. They would go back and forth in crazy ways, beefing with each other, accusing each other of stealing, freezing the other team's locker room on purpose, fucking up the field. They did everything they could to get the one up on the other. But Vince Lombardi was just a legend, man. He had so many quotes, but one of my favorites is, he said, if you play together as a team, you've got to care for one another. You've got to love each other. Then you know you've got a team. Vince Lombardi said this after their first championship win when he was just crying his eyes out. This is a guy who cared, did everything he could to win, and when he finally got a taste of victory, it was all the more sweet because he was with the people that he loved, that he worked every day with. And this is what sports are about to me, man. This is what makes football so special. So when you go to war with these guys, guess what? It makes the end all the more sweet. But yeah, in 1963, Jim Brown did some stuff. You know, he had an average season for himself. He had 1,863 yards in 14 games. And listen, man, for reference, okay, in Eric Dickerson's 2,000-yard season, he had 379 carries. An insane season. Arguably the best ever. Whereas this season from Jim Brown, he had 291 carries. If he had 379 carries, because he averaged 6.4 yards per attempt, which is just fucking absurd, that's not okay. If he had the same amount of carries as Dickerson, played the same amount of games, he would have ran for 2,425 yards. 2,425. And imagine if he had the current day schedule too, but yeah, did I mention that he is better with the stick and ball? And he almost had an all-pro next to him in Ernie Davis? He also, beat his wife, but that, yeah. Anyways, the Bears were back in 1963, and they weren't standing for this whole Packers dynasty thing, okay? I mean, Paul Hornung got the Terry Rozier treatment, though, which was a bit of a help for the Bears, because he was banned for the season for betting. Not ideal, but the Bears were led by Mike Ditka now, an amazing Hall of Fame tight end, and a great defense led by Doug Atkins and other guys, and they won the chip. But how long would it be before the Packers would return? Well, not in 1964, because the Browns were fucking back, as they won a chip with Jim Brown, and they just killed the league MVP Johnny Unitas and the Colts in the championship game. Again, it's just crazy to me how dominant the Browns have been. They literally, since joining the league, have been untouchable. No one has come close to knocking them off their seat. They had Otto Graham and easily transitioned straight into Jim Brown, and they're still going. Anyways, the Vikings, they're an NFL team, by the way. Haven't really talked about them. But that season, in 1964, they also had the famous play where Jim Marshall ran the wrong way. Just an absolute timeless classic, which is really a shame because he was a really good NFL player and a multiple-time Pro Bowler. But let's also check in on AFL land, because in 64, the Jets needed a little rebranding, okay? They were tired of their quarterback. There he is. Dick Wood. He doesn't leave me alone. He always returns. He always comes back. Anyways, yeah, Dick Wood was not a very good quarterback, and they needed a new one. And they ended up getting Joe Namath in 1965, one of the greatest quarterback prospects of all time. Now, there were a lot of red flags with the guy. His legs were just absolutely cooked. It's a shame if he didn't suffer that injury at Alabama. Things would have been really different in his career. He was always absurdly talented, but his career would eventually succumb to injuries. But his light did flicker very, very brightly for just a minute. Anyways, in 1965, the Raiders in the AFL also got Al Davis to run the team now. And they had Dick Wood at quarterback? How the fuck did he get here? Anyways, I'm done with him, okay? If we're going back to the AFL and figuring out what the fuck is going on, too, things just continue to get confusing. Again, this is an era of NFL football dominated by the Packers, which is, I guess, normal, the Bears, the Browns, and the Lions a little bit, too. But in AFL land, the Bills and the Chargers have won the last 3 chips from 63 to 65. What the fuck is happening? Also, by this point, the playoffs didn't really exist. It was one championship game, basically. And the Chargers specifically had a bit of a steroid problem, so yeah, take for that what you may. But the final pre-Super Bowl season took place in 1965, and things were about to change forever. But before that, the Packers got one more on the way out, okay? They beat the Colts in overtime and would play the Browns in the championship game, and it was an ugly, ugly weather game. The 2 dominant teams of their era going at it. This was peak early football, and the Packers pretty much sent the whole team at Jim Brown every single play. They literally said, "We will not lose to Jim Brown alone." And that was basically the Browns' game plan. So, yeah, they ended up getting clamped, and the Packers won the game, their 9th title at the time. And Jim Brown won the MVP this season, but he retired. He retired after the year in his prime, and that was the end of the career of one of the greatest players ever. But yay, in 1966, a merger was finally announced, but it wouldn't happen until 1970, so we still gotta separate the leagues. But the Super Bowl was announced. The champion of each league would play in this final game called the Super Bowl. And also the Falcons and Dolphins are here as teams, and a lot of AFL legends were about to come to the league. There was Lance Allworth, nicknamed Bambi, who had 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons for the Chargers, one of the best wide receivers of all time. George Blanda, who played for 26 years. Again, trust me, we'll talk about him more later. I keep saying it, but we will. Len Dawson, Don Maynard, Jack Kemp, John Haddle. It was a lot of talent that was coming to the league eventually and would play in the Super Bowl if they got there. But 1966 was really the same old, same old. The Bears were still lagging behind the Packers just a little bit, but they had new pieces now. Gale Sayers was the best running back in the league and took the title from Jim Brown. And in his second year, he led the league in rushing and would make 5 All-Pro teams in his first 5 years, but a few devastating injuries would rob us of an even better Hall of Fame career. But yeah, the guy was basically just, and I mean this in the nicest ways, prehistoric Todd Gurley. He was amazing, but his career didn't last for very long. Also, the Giants and Skins played the weirdest scoregami game possibly ever, with a final score of 72-41. Yeah, that happened. But it was really just dominance from the Packers. Again, since the Eagles' 1960 championship loss, Vince Lombardi hasn't lost yet in the playoffs. And Unitas won an MVP, but the Packers ran through everyone again. And they ended up playing the Chiefs in Super Bowl I. And the game began with guys on jetpacks, and there were like fucking pigeons everywhere. Watch the film, okay? It happened, I swear. But the Packers absolutely dominated off of the back of one of the most underrated quarterbacks of all time in Bart Starr, and they just demolished everyone. And who better to win Super Bowl I than Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers? And their dynasty just kept rolling. In '68, the question remained simple. Could anyone beat the Packers? And that guy that almost got him was his former friend, sort of, Tom Landry. Landry and the Cowboys had a hell of a team, and they fought the Packers valiantly in what would later be known as the Ice Bowl, one of the coldest games in NFL history. And it was great, I'm not even gonna lie. It was a lot of slow offense, good defensive play in an ugly weather game, but it had a Cowboys flea flicker which kept the game close, and the Packers needed to get a game-winning touchdown drive to clinch a Super Bowl appearance. And they did just that. Bart Starr took the team down the field, and on a QB sneak, Bart Starr ended the game, and the Packers were in the Super Bowl again, where they would face the AFL's Raiders, who, again, were revived by Al Davis at this point, under quarterback Darryl LaMonica as well. But it's interesting because this game is sort of part lost media. People haven't been able to fully 100% recover all aspects of the game, but the Packers won it in dominating fashion from the score sheet at least, and they would win back-to-back Super Bowls, becoming the first team to three-peat since the Packers with Curly Lambeau. And the Bulldogs, if we want to go all the way back to the beginning. But sadly, Lombardi was carried off the field that day as a victor, but due to his health issues, he retired, and he would never coach the Green Bay Packers again. He would return for a brief stint in Washington, but yeah, this was truly the end of Vince Lombardi and the Packers dynasty. What do you mean I'm only 25 pages in? Oh, God. Oh, no. I've been recording for an hour and 40 minutes. Fuck. Hey, it's me, future TubFrog. I'm just cutting into the video for a second. You know, if you've been watching so far, I really appreciate it. This video is by far, and hopefully will always be, the biggest video on my channel. But this is the full first announcement of the TubFrog merch store. It's been a long time in the making, but we finally... I could finally give you some of these beanies that I, wear every single video. This is the full TubFrog beanie with the logo. We got everything coming together here, and there's plenty more on the website itself. The link is in the description. You can browse through and take some mugs if you want. We have all sorts of hoodies, shirts, everything you can browse through yourself. And I promise it's gonna be worth your time if you look at it. So, I don't know if you're feeling the fisherman's fold or you're gonna go for... this is my classic fisherman's fold look here, but you can be showing the logo, whatever you may want. But yeah, it's just it's really exciting to finally be able to do this. So I really hope if you guys want to support me, support the channel, get some TubFrog merch on your own, in your home, in your humble abode. If you want an okay so mug, it's the place to look. So yeah, it's really exciting to be able to launch the merch store. So check it out, link in the description. Thank you so much to all of you who are still watching as well. So okay, Lombardi was gone. That means there's a massive power vacuum, essentially, in the NFL, and the Colts look to be that next dynasty to step up. Again, Johnny Unitas was still playing at an MVP level, but he did get hurt this season, and meant his backup quarterback, Earl Morrall, filled his position, and he stepped up and fucked around to win the MVP, again, as a backup. And they also had an insane defense, led by former first overall pick Bubba Smith, who they traded for, basically, and they had a young head coach in Don Shula, so they ended up being an amazing team and would make the Super Bowl and face the New York Jets. Yeah, they made it out of the AFL this year, and it was basically a two-man race between them and the Raiders. And famously, this rivalry produced the Heidi Bowl, which was a game in which the Raiders had a wild comeback to win it with 43 points, but no one really saw it because with just a little bit of time left in the fourth quarter, the broadcasting team thought the game was over and was fine to shift it to a show called Heidi, and people around the country missed one of the greatest comebacks in NFL history. But the Jets were quarterbacked by Joe Namath and had Don Maynard at wide receiver, and Joe Namath specifically, again, is one of the most famous players in NFL history for very little having to do with his on-the-field stuff. He was just a larger-than-life brazen dude. Think of like a diva wide receiver, but this dude was a quarterback in the 1960s. He was going around, fucking whoever he wanted, doing everything, but he showed up on Sundays still. In his prime, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and the Jets beat the Raiders in the AFL Championship game and would make the Super Bowl, where, again, in Super Bowl III, one of the most famous games in NFL history would be played. Jets vs. Colts, Namath's guarantee. It was just cinematic. Shit out of a movie. Joe Namath, before the game, was basically heckled by a Colts player and said, you know what, we're going to win the game. I guarantee it. And the Jets, they showed up. Again, during this time, it's very important to remember that the AFL was still thought of as way less than the NFL. So this game made everyone think, okay, hold on. Maybe the AFL is just as good. And the Colts looked like garbage. Earl Morrall played awful, so badly that they forced an injured Johnny Unitas to come back into the game, and that didn't change anything either. Weeb Ewbank and the Jets used the run game led by Matt Snell, who had 120 yards to win the game. Joe Namath played efficient, clean football, and he was named the Super Bowl MVP as he walked off the field a victor, famously wagging his finger in one of the best NFL films looks we've ever seen.
Play.
Oh, also the Bills drafted O.J. Simpson. I forgot to mention that. What a guy. 1969 was the last before the merger officially took place. And at this point, it's crazy, but the Packers just fell off a cliff. I mean, they're not going to be mentioned for a long, long time, but the NFL was changing around them. The Vikings and Cowboys were some of the best teams in football, and the Vikings specifically had the Purple People Eaters with Paul Krause and Alan Page, and they were only getting better. But there were also other great players taking the mantle of the past ones. Roman Gabriel was another notable player who was supposed to be in the AFL. He was drafted by the Raiders, but he chose the NFL over the AFL, and he won the MVP in 1969, leading the league in touchdowns with just 7 picks, and had the lowest interception percentage in the league 3 times throughout his career. So, yeah, he was an amazing player and was pretty good into the 70s as well. But Super Bowl III would be between, again, 2 teams that you kind of wouldn't expect. This is the first year of parity, arguably, in the NFL, and the Chiefs and Vikings would face off against each other. But again, the AFL team won. People began to just 100% believe both leagues were equal, and the Chiefs killed them, too. This was an amazing Chiefs team as well. Len Dawson at quarterback, smoking on the sideline, Hank Stram as the head coach. They also had amazing players on defense, Bobby Bell and Willie Lanier, 2 Hall of Fame linebackers. They were just the better team, and they proved it winning a championship. But this would be the Chiefs' last one for a long, long, long time. But I think Chiefs fans can wait until we talk about them again. Okay, it finally happened. The AFL-NFL merger. And in 1970, both teams were put together. But the biggest move of the entire season wasn't done by a man or a team. No, it was done by a fucking coin. Because in the 1970 draft, the Steelers won a coin flip to get the #1 overall pick and drafted Terry Bradshaw, who would be an instrumental piece for the Steelers' rebuild. Because at this point, the Steelers had been the joke of the NFL. They were an absolutely abhorrent team, but he would start to turn things around for them. Not in his rookie year. He was terrible in his rookie season. Anyways, there was a lot of different changes this season. Not only were league divisions formed, but last names were on uniforms, and more little things like that. But 1970 also was just a wild year, and I finally get to talk about George Blanda. God, I love that guy, man. I mean, he did some insane shit this season. He was a backup quarterback to the Raiders starter, Darryl LaMonica. And at the age of 43, George Blanda was propelled into action as the starter because of LaMonica getting an injury. And he was also the kicker for the Raiders, might I add. This is in 1970 at the age of 43. This is a guy that played in the 40s, was now starting at kicker and QB in the 70s. And in Week 6 versus the Steelers, he kicked a game-tying field goal with seconds left. In Week 7 versus the Chiefs, he threw a game-winning touchdown with 2 seconds left. In Week 8 versus the Browns, he came off the bench after another injury, threw a game-tying touchdown, then kicked the game-winning field goal. And in Week 9, this is 4 straight weeks, he hit a 52-yard field goal with seconds remaining. What the fuck? And also what's crazy about that field goal thing is that would have been the NFL record, but this year Tom Dempsey kicked a 63-yard field goal for the win, which was the NFL record. And there's also lore with him. The dude had a fake foot. He was born with no toes on his right foot and no fingers on his right hand, so he wore a flattened shoe, which did give him an advantage. And eventually the Dempsey rule banned this from happening, but still, I mean, what the fuck is happening? Anyways, George Blanda was still the backup for the Raiders, but in the AFC Championship game, he came in again, and he almost won it. But the Colts rallied in the end off of an absolute dime from Johnny Unitas, and the Colts would make the Super Bowl. And Super Bowl V was one of the most incompetent games ever played. It was beautiful. I highly recommend the highlights, okay? It's called the Mindfuck Bowl in my head, but people call it the Blunder Bowl. It was just insane. Unitas got hurt again, Earl Morrall returned and was shit once more, and this game had the most turnovers in a Super Bowl with 11. The Colts had 7 turnovers themselves and won the game. There were turnovers, penalties, drops. There was a tipped pass for a 75-yard touchdown. The Cowboys fumbled on the one. There was a flea flicker and another fumble. Just so much chaos. But the Colts got a game-winning field goal and won the Super Bowl. But this was the first and only Super Bowl MVP on the losing team, as Cowboys linebacker Chuck Howley won it, but he refused to accept it. And yeah, this Colts dynasty, it's not really coming together, as Unitas would lose a bit of his luster from here and would end up being on the Chargers, but yeah, he would retire soon after. And that was the end of another Hall of Famer's career. But in 1971, yeah, the Cowboys are, they're not going anywhere, but they've upgraded things completely, because in 70, they had an amazing defense, which would be called the Doomsday Defense. Fucking great name, by the way, but they were just missing a leader. And Craig Morton, their quarterback, was pretty good, he just wasn't good enough. And in came effectively a 29-year-old rookie quarterback by the name of Roger Staubach. He only was able to start after a few weeks because Craig Morton started the season off, but the Cowboys ended up going all the way to the Super Bowl, where they would meet Don Shula and the Miami Dolphins. And Shula left the Colts previously, and just like that, had built up another great team elsewhere. But the Cowboys were just a complete team and won their first big game. I mean, throughout all of this time, Tom Landry and the Cowboys were called chokers, but they finally did it, and the Cowboys won the Super Bowl. But one of these teams would be a dynasty of the decade, and the other would not. And who do you think was the great team this decade, huh? Yeah, not Dallas. Yeah, in 1972, well, the year starts out with one of the most interesting swaps, I guess, if you even want to call it that, where owner of the Colts, Carroll Rosenblum, swapped franchises with the Rams. Now, there is so much lore behind this. Basically, Carroll did it because he just wanted to live in Los Angeles, but there's also a lot of baggage behind that because he mysteriously died sometime later, and a scuba diver may have purposely drowned him, which gave all of his possessions to his wife. But let's ignore that for now, because if this swap didn't happen, then the whole Art Modell Brown saga also wouldn't have happened, which we will get to eventually as well. But effectively, just to summarize that a bit, is that the Browns left Cleveland for Baltimore. But if Baltimore was never put into the hands of the Modell family in the first place, it wouldn't have happened. Anyway, in 1972, the Miami Dolphins went undefeated. They had an insane team. They had a wide receiver by the name of Paul Warfield, who I'm assuming a lot of you probably haven't heard of, but he's one of the most underrated players in NFL history. He could catch everything. There was no better route runner. He was just the most consistent dude out there. And he was paired with Hall of Fame quarterback Bob Greasy, but he got injured in week 5. And this meant that, fucking guess who, dude? 74-year-old Earl Morrall, who's still here, he's just following Don Shula now at this point, steps in, and he got this team to an undefeated record. Just crazy shit, man. But also around the NFL, there were some teams rising. The Steelers and the Raiders, with coaches Chuck Noll and John Madden, were cooking something. But still, this was the Dolphins' year, and no one was touching them, as they made the Super Bowl in an 84-degree Super Bowl versus the Skins, and the Dolphins got shut out in the second half, but still won the game. And this guy won the Super Bowl MVP. Like, this is literally 70s football incarnate. But this game also had one of the worst plays ever, as Garo Yepremian botched a kick and then just dropped the football, which led to a non-shutout in the Super Bowl by the Dolphins' no-name defense. But yeah, just not a great game to watch, and the Dolphins did win it, but Washington did get there too. And this was a team that arguably was created by Vince Lombardi, as he came back and led the program for just 2 years, like I said a little bit before. But yeah, they fell short, and they would be back, but not for a bit. 1973 starts with O.J. Simpson running for 2,000 yards. No one could catch O.J., and he was the first player ever to get 2,000 yards in just 14 games, and he won the MVP, but they missed the playoffs. Tough. But for Dallas, things were a little bit complicated because this was Bob Lilly's last season as a star player. He was an amazing defender for the Cowboys, but yeah, it's kind of hard to replace someone who made 7 All-Pro teams in 8 years. He was amazing, and the Cowboys would fall to the Vikings this season, but they would eventually get their replacement in Randy White, who was another all-time defender, so I guess that's just not a problem, huh? But again, just like 72, there's not much to talk about this year, okay? It was one team again, just ransacking everyone, and it was the Dolphins. Again, they won the Super Bowl, and they just had everything you could need in a team. And this is probably like, it's a hot take, I guess, but I don't even think it's debatable at this point, honestly. Through going through NFL history, I think 100% the 73 Dolphins were much better than the 72 Dolphins. Again, at quarterback, they didn't have fucking Earl Morrall anymore. Bob Greasy was healthy and very good. Larry Zonka, their back that just ran over people, was playing some of the best football of his career, and they allowed just 10.7 points per game on defense. 10 a game, and they didn't even have a close playoff game. They won every single playoff game they played by 3 possessions, which is unbelievable. They had no weakness, an elite balanced offense, the best defense possibly like ever. This is a top 5 defense of all time, the best coach ever. I mean, they had no weakness. For me, this team is probably like the 4th best of all time, which is saying something because it's better than the season that just went undefeated, and the Dolphins weren't going anywhere. Or were they? 74 was a weird year because it was hard to predict what was going to happen to the Dolphins. Like, who was possibly going to be a threat? And there was no way to know that the Steelers out of nowhere would have the greatest draft of all time. It will never be topped. It can't be. They drafted Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth, and Mike Webster. 4 Hall of Famers in their first 5 picks, and they joined a team that already had Hall of Famer Mean Joe Green at defensive tackle, one of the greatest players ever, Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Mel Blount. The Steelers were here. They were absolutely unwatchable for their entire franchise's history, and they now had the best team in the NFL. But like I said before, the Raiders were here too, and these two teams, the Raiders and Steelers, wanted to murder each other. The Raiders were loaded too with the Soul Patrol. They had Jack Tatum, George Atkinson was still here for a bit, Cliff Branch, Ken Stabler at quarterback, Phil Villapiano, Art Shell, Gene Upshaw. They were unbelievably stacked too. Again, you could have teams like this in this pre-free agency period. So, yeah, I don't even need to talk about the NFC really, because it was clear the 3 best teams in the league were the Dolphins, Steelers, and Raiders, and they just murdered people this year. But, yeah, the Raiders and Dolphins played one of the best games of all time in what would later be known as the sea of hands in the playoffs. Both teams went back and forth, Greasy and Stabler, but when the Raiders needed a game-winning drive, Ken Stabler always pulled it out. And he just tossed up a prayer which was tipped around and eventually caught, and the Dolphins fell. But the Raiders got a little cocky, said that the two best teams in the league just played on that day, and lost to the Steelers in the AFC Championship. But the Steelers were ready, and they would go on to the Super Bowl to destroy the Minnesota Vikings, who would fall. And the steel curtain just completely clamped them. Minnesota didn't have a first down until the fourth quarter. How does that even happen? So that's the Vikings' third Super Bowl loss at this point, and second in a row. But yeah, also around the league, I just want to mention, the Skins drafted 4th round quarterback Joe Theismann, who returned fucking punts this season, but he would develop into an MVP and Super Bowl winning quarterback in due time. So just wait around for that. So we now push the Dolphins off to the side for a little while, and it really is just the Steelers and the Raiders right now for pretty much the rest of the 70s, dude. It's such a consolidated time of NFL history where it is really just a few teams. For the beginning of the 70s, it was all the Dolphins, and now it's just going to be the Raiders and the Steelers. So it's sort of hard to talk about these other teams when they just don't even come close to the greatness of the top dogs. But yeah, the Steelers and the Raiders just hated each other, because guess what happened a little bit ago that I didn't really mention yet, because I didn't feel like it. I'm a Raiders fan. This is my video. I get to do what I want. But the Immaculate Reception did happen. That was something that occurred. Anyways, though, yeah, these teams didn't like each other because of that, and for a multitude of reasons. And this season, the Cowboys were also here. They're one of the best teams in the NFC, and were competing with the Vikings pretty much all season long, but they ended up making it to the Super Bowl after they beat the Vikings earlier on a Drew Pearson, Roger Staubach Hail Mary. One of the most iconic plays in NFL history, where Roger Staubach just threw it up in the air, said a Hail Mary, and Drew Pearson may have pushed off, but he still caught it, okay? And the Cowboys made the Super Bowl to play against the Steelers. Pittsburgh managed to overcome the Raiders this season, and Oakland fell just short. But yeah, this game was an interesting one. It was a little bit low scoring. People didn't really see that coming, but these teams were more evenly matched than originally thought. And Roger Staubach battled with Terry Bradshaw, but the Steelers just had too much talent. They were just better. They really were. And Tom Landry and the Cowboys fell. And the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty was seemingly inevitable. So please, 1976, can anyone stop the Steelers and Raiders? I mean, hopefully it's the Bucks and the Seahawks, who are new expansion teams. Except not. They didn't do anything. In fact, the Bucks were probably the worst team ever. I don't even want to get into the records this team broke, because I honestly don't even think it's fair. Like, scaled to their era, this is the worst team ever. But it was really just a lot of leftovers and players who were not even good enough to make the worst team in the league previously. So, yeah, shockingly, they were the worst team ever. But they would get a Hall of Famer in the draft in Leroy Selman pretty soon, and shockingly would bounce back. So who was it? Who was it between the Steelers or the Raiders that would win the Super Bowl? Because it really was just, it was the AFC Championship game, but it technically was the Super Bowl. And the Raiders were hungry and destroyed everyone with a violent intent this season. They needed a bit of a lifeline to avoid a loss to the Patriots in the playoffs, but they faced the Steelers in the AFC Championship Super Bowl, basically. Yeah, and the Steelers were also playing their best football possibly ever. They started out slow, but after week 5, the Steelers allowed 3 points per game. For fucking more than half the season, they allowed 3 points. Oh, what the fuck, man? And they had an NFL record 5 shutouts this year, including 3 in a row, and the streak was broken when Miami scored 3 on them. But the Steelers sustained too many battle wounds. I think if they had won the Super Bowl this year, this would have been possibly the best team ever, but they lost pretty much their entire running back room, and the Raiders were able to deal with them and made the Super Bowl, where they would face the Vikings again. And they needed a win too, because the Vikings were just considered losers. QB Fran Tarkenton was a guy who just couldn't show up in the big game. And yeah, he didn't. He ended up throwing a game-losing interception taken all the way back to the house by Willie Brown, one of the most iconic shots in NFL films history as well. And the Vikings were now 0-4 in Super Bowls. You love to see it, man. God, when will they ever win anything? The answer is never, and not in 1977 either, because this is one of the funniest years of all time, okay? It starts with the Bucs losing 26 straight games. 26! That is probably untouchable. The Browns are, they're working hard to beat that record, but yeah, the Bucs are just at the bottom of the bottom. But eventually, like I said, they would get things going. Deacon Jones, another one of the most dominant players in NFL history of the past, was nerfed. He wasn't in the league anymore, but he ended up dominating the NFL during his heyday in the mid to late 60s with the head slap, but that was completely illegal now. But still, he was one of the most dominant players ever, which we will talk about more later on. I'm saving him, trust me, this is all planned. We also need to discuss the Atlanta Falcons this season because they employed the Grits Blitz defense this year, and they have the all-time record for the fewest points allowed in a season, allowing just 9.2 points per game, and they allowed just 1,384 passing yards total. For reference, this year's Jets had the least passing yards in the league at 2,784, and even they were breaking records for being shit. And this Falcons team missed the playoffs. They didn't even make the playoffs because Steve Bartkowski at quarterback threw 5 touchdowns and 13 picks. Walter Payton is also here now, and he had an insane year, absolutely carrying the Bears to the playoffs, who did get annihilated by the Cowboys, but he led the league with 1,852 yards and 14 touchdowns. He was the entire offense, and he still averaged 5.5 yards per carry and 132 yards per game with the MVP. But again, it was probably just going to be the Raiders, the Steelers, and possibly the Cowboys for the NFC. But the Broncos beat the Raiders after a pretty terrible no fumble call. And yeah, the Cowboys ended up making the Super Bowl versus the Broncos? What the fuck? How? Yeah, the Steelers fell to the Broncos as well, even before the Raiders did. So this is a little bit of an unexpected Super Bowl, but I guess the Cowboys will take it, and Craig Morton was the quarterback for the Broncos now. So there was a little bit of a revenge factor there, and he shot himself. Okay, then. Yeah, so much for the Orange Crush defense for the Broncos, as Craig Morton decided to throw for 4 interceptions with a 27% completion percentage. And the Cowboys won another Super Bowl under Tom Landry and Roger Staubach. They were the mini dynasty, I guess. So sorry, I was being mean to them before, but they were amazing this decade for the most part. And this season also had a lot of different rule changes. The Mel Blount rule was instituted as well, restricting defensive contact with receivers past 5 yards, and also allowed offensive linemen to be able to legally hold, sort of. So yeah, scoring was a bit down, and that made this season pretty unique, as well as there being no Raiders, no Dolphins, no Steelers. But the Steelers returned in 1978. Now, let's talk about things that happened around the league, other than just the Steelers and Raiders and the Cowboys. But Miracle at the Meadowlands happened, where the Giants had an unlosable situation to Philly and fucking lost it. Brian Daboll would be very proud somewhere, but yeah, this game is pretty much the reason why teams kneel the ball now, but it just continued being the same old stuff. The Cowboys beat the Rams 28-0, and the Steelers crushed their opponent too, meaning that this was the Super Bowl again. There's just no reason to talk about other things. The Cowboys and the Steelers allowed 5 points total in their championship games to make the Super Bowl. This is just crazy dominance, and this is what the free agency period would change about the league later on. But in this pre-free agency time, where if you're drafted by a team, you're just kinda there, this was the norm. But this did give us some great football, because Steelers vs. Cowboys was one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. It was back and forth, pure cinema. The Steelers' defense was kind of getting shredded by Roger Staubach, as after they fell behind due to Jackie Smith, a Cardinals tight end legend, dropping a ruthless pass that would have changed the game, the Cowboys had to play from behind, and off of an onside kick recovery fell just short. And the Steelers won the Super Bowl 35-31. But the Cowboys could have easily won this if they hadn't dropped that touchdown pass, or if Randy White in a cast didn't try to lateral and lost the ball. Who knows? But the Steelers won again. But the dynasty was running out of steam. 1979 also had more rule changes. The Holy Roller was nerfed, which happened before, so yeah, no more of that. But even weirder, not even a rule change, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a good NFL team. After they had won just 7 games in the previous 3 seasons, the Bucs won 10 games and ended up winning the division and won their first playoff game in franchise history under quarterback Doug Williams. This team wasn't amazing, but they were functioning off of pure vibes from head coach John McKay and the rest of the team. And John McKay, man, just one of the most quotable dudes of all time. Look up a few of his quotes. I won't say a lot of them here. I can give you one where he was like, how do you feel about your team's execution? And he said he was in favor of it. Love the dude, but look more up. Trust me, there's some gems. But the Chargers, for the first time, I'm going to mention them, they had a great offense now. With Don Coryell as the guy in charge, they were loaded. Dan Fouts at quarterback, wide receivers Jefferson and Charlie Joyner. They were reinventing the pass game. Don Coryell was one of the smartest men in the league, and he was just having Dan Fouts air it out, and it was working. But then you also had teams like the Oilers, who were just doing the complete opposite thing, because they had a hell of a run this season with running back Earl Campbell, who was just a sledgehammer of a back if there ever was one. He literally did not care about his own personal safety. He was just trying to run you over and get in the end zone. But they had a crazy run this season and would go on to make the AFC Championship game, where they would fall to the Steelers. And they should have won the game, or at least kept it way closer than it was, because Mike Renfro had a touchdown catch that was ruled incomplete. There was replay, but there wasn't review, so they could watch the replay, but couldn't make any decisions overturning it, and this would be a major moment that would help replay review be a thing in the future. But yes, the Oilers were just a magical team this season, and Earl Campbell was the main reason for that. And unlike guys like Derrick Henry, he never had the offense to stretch out teams and challenge them, so he just had to do it all himself. And in 2 AFC Championship games versus the Steelers in his career, he was held to 62 yards and 25 yards, so bit of an issue there. But 1980 would go on to be his best season, and I'm breaking the rules here a bit, it's still 1979, but he led the league with 13 touchdowns, 1,934 yards, also leading the league, and 5.2 yards per carry, also leading the league. He was the All-Pro, second in MVP voting after winning the MVP the year prior, and for the first 3 years of his career, from 78 through 80, he led the league in rushing every year of his career. It's a shame injuries would slow him down, and he wasn't the same player again for a while, but hey man, what can I say? Bronco Nagurski, Derrick Henry, Earl Campbell, I like the big running backs, bro. That's all I gotta say about that. I won't elaborate further. Anyways, the Super Bowl was the Steelers and the Rams, who were one of the biggest Cinderella teams of all time. They were injured beyond belief. They were a really good team, but all their best players just like fucking broke this season. Jack Youngblood, arguably their best player, played the majority of the season on a broken leg. So this game was crazy. It was basically the last year of the Steel Curtain, with all their players getting very old, versus a team that was supposed to be great, but just suffered too many injuries. And the Rams had a chance to win it. They were up 19-17 in the fourth quarter, and would have been one of the most unlikely Super Bowl champions ever. But the Steelers pulled it off in the end, and they won the game, meaning that their dynasty was cemented forever. But the Rams they were the dynasty that kinda never was. They won 7 straight division titles, won nearly 100 games in the 70s, and had 0 Super Bowls to show for it. From 73 to 78, they won at least 10 games every year. They were ingrained into LA culture. They had stars all over the place, most notably Merlin Olsen, who made 14 straight Pro Bowl teams, and Jack Youngblood, which is probably the toughest duo ever to play defense. So that is the 70s decade as well, and things are changing though. I mentioned a bit about Don Coryell and the Chargers, but new guys like Bill Walsh would come into the league and stretch the field out even more, making receivers all the more valuable, and this would also sadly make a lot of things extinct. People like Dick Butkus, who were just out there smashing people, who was another great player in the 60s and early 70s for the Bears, he kind of couldn't really exist anymore. But 70s were a crazy decade, man. There were so many great nicknames, too. Just the Steel Curtain, Orange Crush, the Doomsday Defense, Purple People Eaters. Just great stuff. So, yeah, amazing era of football, but things are about to get a little different. So, we now move on to a different era of football. One that also left behind a lot of legends, some being Ken Houston. Again, I feel bad I can't mention every single player because this video would just be 12 hours long, but he was a guy who made 12 straight Pro Bowls for the Oilers and Skins, Hall of Famer, one of the best safeties of all time, and it's just a shame because I didn't really get time to talk about him, and he's a guy that pretty much gets forgotten by a lot of more modern fans, so I just thought he deserved his flowers. Another guy that, well, he got some flour, alright, but Chester Marcole, kicker for the Packers. Well, this year he ended up getting a game-winning kick blocked, but he somehow recovered it off the ricochet and took it in for a game-winning touchdown. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because he was on coke during this play. The dude was high out of his mind and scored the game-winning touchdown. But this year, the Raiders were back, baby. The silver and black. Led by the former first overall pick bust for the Patriots, Jim Plunkett, they were one of, if not the most unlikely wildcard Super Bowl win team of all time. They became the first wildcard Super Bowl winner ever, but they had an outstanding defense again. Lester Hayes was a big reason for that, as he had 13 picks in the regular season, the most since the merger, and he ended the season with 18 total interceptions, including in the playoffs. So he was incredible this year, but also this season was a bit, I don't want to say tainted, but memorable for their stickum use, which was a glue substance that would go all over the players, specifically Lester Hayes and wide receiver Fred Biletnikoff, and would help them keep the ball. The Saints are a team now, by the way, and they ended up going 1-15 this season, and were just in the process of absolutely shattering their quarterback Archie Manning. He was 31 at this point, but his career was basically just broken down due to mental anguish. But they almost went winless, but luckily the New York Jets exist, so it didn't happen. But the Raiders ended up beating the Browns off of an absolutely horrendous interception, which ended the game, and yeah, this set up the Raiders versus the Eagles in the Super Bowl, after the Eagles beat the Cowboys and the Raiders beat the Chargers. And the Super Bowl was just an utter annihilation. The Raiders completely blew out Philadelphia, who were led by, I guess, a solid defense and the tallest wide receiver ever in Harold Carmichael. But the Raiders were not going to be a dynasty, so the NFL was still wide open. But the draft this season changed everything, because the New York Giants in 1981 took Lawrence Taylor. And there were even more amazing players. Kenny Easley, another Hall of Famer, was taken. The Raiders got Howie Long. The Skins got Russ Grimm, a piece for the Hogs. And those are even two more Hall of Famers. So this draft was absolutely foolproof, seemingly, but there were some busts, as the 6th overall pick went to the Packers, who took quarterback Rich Campbell. And he never even started a game and was out of the league instantly. So yeah, there's a reason we're not really talking about the Packers anymore. But this honestly was one of the best seasons ever. The Giants came back into relevance finally with their new defensive coordinator Bill Parcells, who in years' time, with his defensive coordinator in the future Bill Belichick, would transform the team. But yeah, they had the defensive rookie of the year in Lawrence Taylor, and he was here to stay. But this was an absolutely insane playoffs overall. The Giants and Eagles played a really close game, the Jets and Bills, but specifically, the Dolphins and the Chargers played the greatest playoff game possibly ever, called the Epic in Miami. The game was over 4 hours long, and it was fucking humid, man. People were, like, fainting damn near on every single play, and it had everything. Backup quarterbacks, comebacks, blocked kicks, a fucking lateral for a touchdown, and Kellen Winslow had one of the best performances of all time. As a Hall of Fame tight end, he had 13 catches, 166 yards, a touchdown, and blocked a kick himself. And by game's end, he had to be carried off the field due to exhaustion. But just the next week, the Chargers would fall to the Bengals in the Freezer Bowl. And in the 1981 AFC Championship game, which was an insane minus 59 degrees Fahrenheit, factoring in the wind chills and the air temperature, which is the coldest game in NFL history, the Bengals were able to neutralize the Chargers' high-powered air attack, and with Anthony Munoz, one of the best offensive linemen ever, Cincinnati dominated the trenches and made their first Super Bowl, where they would meet the San Francisco 49ers. And like I said, the NFL was wide open, and the Niners were going to take their chance, because they had Bill Walsh, who worked alongside Paul Brown for a long time with the Bengals, and he was ready for revenge. He had so many incredibly innovative ideas and was airing it out a lot with his quarterback, Joe Montana, who is one of, if not the greatest draft steal of anyone not named Tom Brady. But, you know, that's, I just don't want to hurt his feelings. I'm just trying to be nice, okay? Do you forgive me, Tom? Anyways, the Niners barely made the Super Bowl after beating the Cowboys in the catch game, but they were here. And the Bengals had MVP Ken Anderson, but the Niners had Joe Montana. And they controlled the entire game, basically. Even though the score was close, it really wasn't a game. The Bengals were just outplayed, honestly. Bill Walsh had an incredible scheme that the Bengals didn't have an answer for, and the Cincinnati Bengals fell, for the first time, to the Niners in the Super Bowl. But 1982 might be the weirdest season, at least until 2020, because there's so much that doesn't make sense this year, okay? So it started off by being a strike-shortened year. The players were not happy, to say the very least, and there was just 9 games played, which is already weird in and of itself, but that also meant that there was a 16-team playoff that happened, and yeah, that got insane, but we'll get there in a second. The NFL also finally started counting sacks as a statistic, but what about the other years? Well, when you look back and figure out every single sack that ever happened, I mean, I didn't fucking do that, someone else did, but things get very, very interesting. Using game books compiled by the press box, people tallied every single sack, one by one. Just absolutely insane stuff. I'll link it in the description if I can find it, but it shows some crazy numbers. Specifically in 64, 67, and 68, Deacon Jones had 22, 21 and a half, and 22 sacks. This is the Deacon Jones part that I was talking about. I mean, he was literally unblockable. The head slap was OP, and he truly was one of the best defenders, if not the best and most dominant NFL player ever. Also, there's a lot of interesting takeaways from this. In 1978, just 4 years prior, Lions rookie Al Baker had 23 sacks as a rookie. So Michael Strahan's eventual record would have never even stood if Al Baker got the credit that he deserved. He averaged over a sack a game as a rookie and was a multiple-time Pro Bowler in his career. So he was amazing, and he deserves to be recognized as the all-time sack leader for a long, long time. Anyways, let's talk about Washington, because they also became an underrated dynasty intertwined with the Niners, sort of, but in different ways we'll get to. Anyways, they won the Super Bowl this season with running back John Riggins. He was kind of a running back. He really was just a human bowling ball, but they were led by their offensive line called the Hogs, as well as MVP kicker Mark Moseley. Yeah, I just said that. MVP kicker Mark Moseley. Yeah, Dan Fouts, quarterback for the Chargers, was absolutely robbed of that MVP, but to be fair, Washington did dominate, and he was really good this season, as Riggins, specifically, maybe should have won the MVP, at least the playoff one, as he set the playoff rushing record with 610 rushing yards in 4 games, and had his iconic 4th and 1 touchdown run to seal the chip for Washington. And it was clear they weren't going anywhere, and they did not. 1983 was clearly going to be up to Washington and the Niners, for the NFC at least, but the AFC was a bit up in the air, and there was a lot of newcomers, specifically in the draft, as this was one of the best draft classes of all time, specifically for quarterbacks too. Dan Marino, John Elway, and Jim Kelly were all taken, and would go on to make the Hall of Fame, but the Raiders, man. The Raiders were back. Again, this team, man, they weren't supposed to be that great, but damn it, they were dominant beyond belief. Led by last year's Offensive Player of the Year, Marcus Allen, they were amazing, on the ground at least. But again, this team was a bit flimsy. They had some weaknesses, but when they put it all together, it was tough to beat them, man. They had amazing players on defense, like I said, with Howie Long. Lyle Alzado was here. They had dogs all over the place, and the Raiders' culture was alive and well with Al Davis. And they had that Super Bowl experience with Jim Plunkett still there. So get them into the playoffs, and they're dangerous. And that is what happened, as they ended up annihilating the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Seattle Seahawks in the AFC Championship game and divisional round, and made the Super Bowl. And yeah, in the NFC, it ended up being a Washington vs. 49ers NFC Championship game, but it ended in very controversial fashion, as some thought that the 49ers were robbed, but there were bad calls throughout the entire game on both sides of the ball, and the Skins did miss 4 fucking field goals, so thanks, Mark. Really glad that you showed why you're the MVP last year. Anyways, the Skins made the Super Bowl, and they were probably just going to dominate the Raiders. I mean, they scored 541 points on the season. Joe Theismann won the MVP, and their defense was incredible too. They were loaded with Hall of Famers, but the Raiders said, nah, I'd win, and they just annihilated them. This was one of the biggest blowouts and statement blowouts in Super Bowl history. The Raiders won 38-9, and they did it. Marcus Allen had an iconic touchdown run, and the Raiders dynasty was also here. No, it wasn't. This is our last win ever, and yeah, I'm not really going to talk about us for a long time, for my mental health at least. 1984, though, was a year that was kind of wildly uncompetitive because the 49ers were possibly the best team of all time. They went 15-1, and Jerry Rice wasn't even on the team yet. I mean, I still want to talk about Jerry Rice for a second, just to nerd out about him. I know he's not here yet, but still, dude. He would join the team in 1985, and this man owns 55 unbreakable records, at least. He has 22,895 receiving yards. Second place, for instance, is Larry Fitzgerald, and he's off by 6,000 yards. 6,000! The gap between Jerry Rice and Larry Fitzgerald is bigger than the gap between Larry and number 29 on the all-time list, Jimmy Smith. That is inconceivable. The guy was over 1,000 yards in 14 seasons, none of which took place in the passing yards era. He had 6 years over 1,400 yards, which is the most ever, and he is the only non-kicker to play in over 300 NFL games. Besides one guy specifically, but we'll talk about him later. He's not in this story yet. But anyways, this season the Jets were actually pretty good, as they had Joe Klecko and Mark Gastineau, an amazing defense, but they lost 7 of their last 8 games and missed the playoffs. Classic Jets stuff. Eric Dickerson ran for 2,105 yards for the Rams, the all-time single-season record, which still stands today, and he is one of the most underappreciated running backs of all time. And this season was just the year of the record breakers, because Dan Marino also existed, and boy did he do stuff in 1984. In his sophomore season, he broke the league. Like, that's not even... I can't even say words enough to describe what he did this season. Dan Marino threw for 5,000 plus yards and 48 touchdowns, not only leading the league, but shattering every all-time record by a lot, and he led the NFL in passer rating at just the age of 23. And scaled to this era, he would have had 6,000 yards and 55 plus touchdowns. Nobody had an answer for him, and he had 421 yards and 4 touchdowns on Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game, the team that passed on him in the draft, his hometown team too, and Miami and Shula were back in the Super Bowl to face the 49ers. but the Niners were just too good. Again, I say it was uncompetitive because no one was beating the Niners, but everyone around him was putting on a show. And yeah, the Niners blew out the Dolphins, but surely Dan Marino would be back. Surely. Anyways, many people, many football historians specifically, cite the 1984 season as the one that saved football. There were just so many all-time talents playing at an all-time level. Eric Dickerson, Dan Marino, Joe Montana, hell, Charlie Joyner became the all-time leader in receiving yards at the time for the Chargers. Art Monk, Washington Hall of Fame receiver, set the record for most receptions in a year. Mark Gastineau broke the sack record. There was just so much going on, and honestly, I do agree. I think football as we know it would not be where it is now if it weren't for the 84 season. 1985 is another season that is pretty uncompetitive, and it's because of one singular team. The fucking Chicago Bears. They were not standing for anything having to do with a level playing field this season. Buddy Ryan, their defensive coordinator, assembled a team of fucking assassins, led by Mike Singletary, Richard Dent, Dan Hampton, Steve McMichael. This team was vicious, and they also had the best running back basically ever, too. Walter Payton was playing at an amazing level. Jim McMahon, the quarterback, was steady enough to be good. Yeah, this was just an unreal team. I don't even want to get into all the stats that they had on defense alone, but this team was a one of one and will never be replicated again. And they ended up going all the way to the Super Bowl, and the only team that beat them all season long, because they went 15-1, was Dan Marino's Dolphins. But the Dolphins fell one game short because of the Patriots, who then got fed alive to Chicago, and the game wasn't even close. The Bears forced the Patriots to switch quarterbacks. It was that bad. But the Bears actually had to beat another weird quarterback in the NFC Championship game in the Rams QB Dieter Brock, who was a 34-year-old rookie for them. But he never played again. He literally played one season, one NFC Championship appearance, and his career succumbed to injuries, and that was it. But yeah, the Bears demolished the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and their starting quarterback, Tony Eason, was pulled after going 0 for 6, 0 yards, and a fumble and taking 3 sacks. He looked spooked out there, and the Bears won 46-10. And after the season, one of the best players in NFL history retired, John Hanna, a Patriots lineman, but he finally got to play in a Super Bowl. It just is a shame that didn't work out, but yeah, the last 10 years of his career, he made first-team All-Pro 7 times. He was absolutely amazing at left guard, arguably the best ever. 1986, and yep, remember when I was talking about the New York Giants? Well, they're here now, and yeah, Lawrence Taylor fucking won the MVP as a defender, and along with Bill Belichick, Parcells, who are the coaches, and Carl Banks, his fellow linebacker, Lawrence Taylor led the Giants to being the best team in football, as he had 20.5 sacks, and the Giants went 14-2, and would make it all the way to the Super Bowl. But what? How? What happened to the Bears? Well, they had the same team and had another year of dominant defense, even though Buddy Ryan left for the head coaching job in Philadelphia, but they lost their quarterback. Jim McMahon went down for the season to the dirtiest hit in NFL history when Packers player Charles Barton slammed him into the dirt and knocked him out for the year. And this basically closed the window on this Bears era. But John Elway was also finding his rhythm, as with the Broncos, he beat the Browns and completed the drive, as their misery, again, I guess it's kind of starting or prolonging, but he had an insane postseason and cemented himself as an absolute legend. He was one of the best quarterbacks of all time and was on an absolute heater this season. But that's what this entire playoffs was just about. It was about dominance and basically a fish always being eaten by a bigger fish. The Jets blew a 10-point fourth quarter lead and lost in second overtime to the Browns. Then the Browns allowed the drive to happen against Elway, which was a 98-yard touchdown drive, by the way, and then the Giants annihilated them in the Super Bowl, meaning the New York Giants reigned supreme as the champions of the NFL, and Bill Parcells won his first as a head coach. 87, things are getting back to normal. And by normal, I mean not normal at all, because this was another strike-shortened season. But you know what that means? Strike-shortened year, Washington's gonna win it, right? And yeah, they did. But honestly, this was kind of a meh season. The Bills were quietly building something, as Jim Kelly is finally going to play in the NFL now, because he was busy in the USFL, which is the same league as a certain man by the name of Reggie White, but yeah, he's here now, and they also have Bruce Smith, who is one of the best defenders of all time. Besides that, though, Bo Jackson had his iconic 91-yard touchdown run into the tunnel versus the Seahawks on Monday Night Football, and he is one of the most elusive and athletic human beings to ever play any sport. But overall, the most impressive thing from the season was Jerry Rice, dude, because it's such a shame that this was a strike-shortened year and there was only 12 games played, but Jerry Rice had 22 touchdowns. He could have held the all-time single-season touchdown record easily, forever, basically. Randy Moss eventually broke it in 07, but he set this record in the strike-shortened season. He scored a touchdown in every game of the year. The guy was a monster, and his workout routine, like Walter Payton's, was just so demanding other NFL players wouldn't even dare attempt it. He would do 5-mile hill sprints as a warm-up in the morning. He would then do 21 different exercises, which is like 630 reps a day, and then he would go to the field and run routes. Just fucking nuts, dude. I mean, that's what it takes to be the GOAT. But okay, the 1987 AFC Championship was a rematch. The Browns and the Broncos. Surely the Browns will make do from their past mistakes, and they fumbled. They had a walk-in touchdown, and they fumbled. Ernest Biner is forever remembered in Browns lore for a lot of terrible reasons, which is such a shame, because Biner was playing an amazing football game before this fumble. He had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, but for 2 years in a row, the Browns suffered heartbreak to the Broncos, and they were in the Super Bowl now. But the Skins won it again, under head coach Joe Gibbs and with quarterback Doug Williams, who became the first black quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl as the starter. They did it. The Skins won once more, and were challenging the Niners as the team of the 80s. So, yeah, this was an incredible win for them, insanely dominant, as they scored 35 points in just the second quarter, and fucking Timmy Smith, a no-name running back, had 204 rushing yards, the most in a Super Bowl ever, still to this day. 1989 was a lot of the same. I mean, there was an insane draft this year, headlined by Derek Thomas, Troy Aikman, Deion Sanders, and Barry Sanders. And he might be the best player in college football history, but then when he was drafted, he broke the NFL. He carried the Lions for a decade, and over his 10-year career, he averaged 4.99 yards per carry. Just unheard of. He retired early, but we'll talk about him later on. But the Vikings made an interesting decision this season, and they decided to absolutely doom the rest of the NFL, because they traded away 8 draft picks to the Dallas Cowboys, which they used on players like Emmitt Smith, Darren Woodson, Russell Maryland, and others. And this created an eventual juggernaut in the 90s, and birthed the eventual Cowboys dynasty. But the Vikings got Herschel Walker, so yay! Anyways, there was also some great players that had amazing seasons that we haven't talked about yet. Christian Okoye is one of them. As a fullback, he was dominant, absolutely dominant, leading the league in rushing yards, and he had 370 carries, with also one of the best nicknames ever in the Nigerian Nightmare. He was a first-team All-Pro, and at 6'1", 253, he was literally bigger than, like, all the linemen who were trying to meet him at the line of scrimmage. And then there was also Packers quarterback Don Majkowski, the Magic Man. And the Packers have been absolutely poverty since Lombardi was gone, and even this year in '89, they drafted Tony Mandarich, somehow getting the only bust in the top 5 of this draft. But in 1989, the Magic Man made the Pro Bowl. He led the league in passing yards, and he literally almost won the MVP, but he was a bit of a flash-in-the-pan player, but he did bring some popularity back to Green Bay. 1988 was, honestly, a pretty boring season by all things considered. It was basically the 49ers and everyone else again. The Niners actually stumbled a bit in the regular season, but in the playoffs, they locked the fuck in, and ended up meeting a unfamiliar opponent in the Super Bowl, as they would play against the Cincinnati Bengals? What? They're back? Yeah, somehow they are back, and they have a different quarterback in the MVP Boomer Esiason. But they've had a wild journey to even get here. They basically had their offense completely nerfed versus the Bills. They had a no-huddle style of offense, but the NFL, minutes before the game, banned their offense. They still won that, and now here they were. But this game was a back-and-forth masterclass. The Bengals got here off of an incredible coaching season from Sam Weish and Boomer Esiason being great, but versus the Niners defense, they just fell short. They put up enough points in the very end to win it off of a kick return, but they weren't able to stop Joe Montana's final drive. And off of a last-minute touchdown to John Taylor, the Niners won the Super Bowl. And Jerry Rice would win the Super Bowl MVP, having 215 yards and a touchdown, one of the best single Super Bowl performances ever. And the Niners were still not going anywhere. In 1990, the Buffalo Bills have finally arrived. And I would say throughout this video, excluding expansion teams like the Saints and stuff like that, I've probably talked about them the least amount of anyone, but they're finally here. They're amazing. They have Thurman Thomas. Bruce Smith won the Defensive Player of the Year this season, and with Jim Kelly, Andre Reed, and this amazing offense, they weren't going anywhere. And they would be... I can't lie and say they've won Super Bowls, alright? This is about to be painful for you Buffalo fans. Lock in. Anyways, they ended up making the Super Bowl, but their offense with the K-gun style was crazy. It was so innovative, but it was also controversial because, remember, they were the team that played the Bengals in the AFC Championship game when the Bengals offense was banned, and the Bills complained about it and then went on and stole it themselves. So, yeah, crazy shit. So maybe what happened to them was karma. Anyways, but in NFC land, the Niners were 14-2, but fell short of the three-peat to the Giants. And more specifically, Leonard Marshall, a defender for the Giants, knocked out Joe Montana, who was still playing at an MVP level. Hell, he won the MVP this season, but after this hit, he would only play one more game for the 49ers again. But he would finish his career as a two-time MVP and four-time Super Bowl champion, and just an icon of the 80s. Otherwise, the Raiders had something brewing with Bo Jackson still, who was a part-time player at this point, playing baseball at the same time, but this was the end of his career, as they would beat the Bengals in the playoffs, but lose Bo Jackson to a knee injury in the process, and he would never play again. And the Raiders would get utterly demolished by the Bills without Bo Jackson, setting up a Bills vs. Giants Super Bowl. And Bill Belichick had a scheme for the Bills, okay? They absolutely shut down the Bills' offense by not really shutting it down, by keeping the ball away from them and running the ball over and over again, setting themselves up for a chance to win the game. Although they were out-talented, they were right there, and all they needed was a missed field goal from the Bills, and he... Yeah, just put it in. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm sure the Bills won't ever lose again, but yeah, Washington is back this season, and all of a sudden, they have one of the best teams of all time. Joe Gibbs is still probably the most underrated coach ever, but this team was just a absolute boulder rolling down a hill. They had one of the best offensive lines all season, as they gave up 9 sacks on the year, and the defense allowed 14 points per game, and destroyed every team in their path, including the Buffalo Bills in the Super Bowl. They dropped 41 on the Lions in the NFC Championship game, who were entirely carried by Barry Sanders, and then 37 on the Bills in the Super Bowl. And they had the best DVOA in a season ever. This was another one of the best teams of all time, but they never could replicate this success again. And this playoff win in the Super Bowl would mark the end of the Skins dynasty. But yeah, I just casually mentioned it, but the Lions made the NFC Championship game and won a fucking playoff game. Their only playoff win since 1957 to this point. Bobby Lane was a little stressed out watching the Lions get this far, but luckily the curse held strong. But also, there were some great teams around the league. The 1991 Eagles had one of the best defenses of all time, with Reggie White, Clyde Simmons, Jerome Brown, and they missed the playoffs. The Falcons were also being revived with Deion Sanders and a new culture, and Deion ended up getting a pick, and they ended up forcing a turnover in this game versus the Saints to win it, and it was one of the weirdest plays ever because they could have just fell down and ended it, but no, this is what the Falcons did. They ended up throwing laterals, and almost threw the game. But yeah, they were cooking something, not something good though. But the Bills ended up beating John Elway and the Broncos and advanced to the Super Bowl, where yes, they would get utterly demolished by the Skins. And still though, with the Skins dynasty falling apart, the Bills had shots. 1992 though would start with an utter tragedy, as Reggie White would announce the death of his friend and teammate in Jerome Brown, who was one of the best players in the league too. It's just a tragedy that this happened, but Philadelphia would not recover for a long time, and its fans and players were rattled, as well as everyone around the league, of course. But uh-oh, Dallas is back, and they have a good fucking team. Jerry Jones kicked Tom Landry out, and in came Jimmy Johnson. He had been hired a few years ago to this point, but he brought a full rebuild to this team, a new culture, and a dominant one as well, as Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin anchored an offense that was high-powered and could stand with the best defenses in the league, while they also had an amazing defense themselves. So, yeah, man, all of a sudden, Dallas is the team to beat. But the 49ers also were not going anywhere either, as this Niners-Cowboys rivalry was born, as although Joe Montana was now not here, they had Steve Young. The Niners just have this ability to just spawn in amazing quarterbacks out of nowhere, and they brought in this former USFL player and bust with Tampa, and he quietly became one of the most efficient QBs of all time. It's almost like Shanahan's can make efficient QBs, huh? Wouldn't you know? And I don't say that to throw any shots. It's Mike Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. But yeah, the Bills had a wild season too. They weren't as dominant as in years past, but yeah, they ended up having the greatest comeback in playoff history as they came back versus the Houston Oilers down 35-3, and they did so with a backup quarterback in Frank Reich due to Jim Kelly being injured weeks prior. But they ended up surviving the scare and would advance to the Super Bowl eventually. But this was not as good of a Bills team as in years prior. So with this happening, everyone thought that, yeah, the Super Bowl is basically going to be the NFC Championship game. And everyone knew what the NFC Championship game was going to be, and it was the Niners versus the Cowboys. And that game lived up to the fucking hype. It was low scoring throughout, but the Cowboys ended up rallying with 13 points in the fourth quarter. Troy Aikman played a clean 300-yard, 2-touchdown game, and they won the Super Bowl. Oh yeah, they got to play the Bills. I forgot about that. Yeah, they didn't even really play the Bills. They dropped 52 on them, and this was just an utter annihilation. And the Dallas Cowboys won a Super Bowl. Their first and only Super Bowl without Tom Landry to this point. And their dynasty seemed almost inevitable, or at least it was going to keep up with the Niners one. But quietly, some other teams were doing things on the side. Cortez Kennedy out of nowhere had one of the best seasons of all time as a defender, as he won the Defensive Player of the Year for Seattle and also almost won the MVP, and the Packers also silently got a quarterback by the name of Brett Favre, who was traded from Atlanta for pretty much nothing. Then, not so quietly, in 1993, the Packers got Reggie motherfucking White. And throughout this video, I keep saying, oh, I haven't really talked about this guy yet, I feel bad. But again, dude, there's just so many people to talk about. But Reggie White is one of, if not the best defenders of all time. I would put him at number 2 ever behind Lawrence Taylor, but still, dude, this guy was unblockable. He would full-on toss grown men to the floor, and he ended up joining Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre in Green Bay because, God said so? Shit, whatever works, I guess. The Patriots also bottomed out this season and would get their franchise quarterback in Drew Bledsoe. The Chiefs got Joe Montana, as he's not done yet, and they would go on to make the AFC Championship game with Marcus Allen, so yeah, that's a thing. He was here now because he was beefing with Al Davis, and Lawrence Taylor would retire after 1993. And he was a character. He was an 8-time All-Pro, a Hall of Famer for sure, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, and won a fucking MVP. Nobody to ever play this game was more feared than Lawrence Taylor. He hit like an absolute beast, and he did have some off-the-field issues, though, which do plague his career, as he had frequent drug use. He sent hookers to other teams' hotel rooms, and he has some allegations as well, as I won't say it out loud, but as you can see here, this did happen. But Bill Belichick said he was the best player he's ever seen play. Just, yeah, a bit of a complicated figure. But yeah, I say all this to just, once again, say that the Cowboys just obliterated everyone. As this time, the NFC Championship game between the Niners and the Cowboys was not even close. And Dallas had one of the best teams ever this season. It was just a crazy, crazy year for them, as they dropped 38 on the Niners and then 30 on the Bills in the Super Bowl. And Buffalo was just lamb to the slaughter again. It's just, I don't want to throw too much shit at Buffalo because I feel bad for them. These were games they weren't really supposed to win. Except that first, the Giants Super Bowl was bad. They should have gotten that one. Besides that, they just ran into 3 all-time great teams. Just fucking unlucky, man. It is what it is. In 1994, the coin was flipped again. Who was going to win the Super Bowl this year, the Cowboys or the Niners? Again, like during this time, in this era, I get it. It was like great football in terms of teams, but dude, the free agency was very needed. Parity was at an all-time low, and yeah, what do you know? One of those 2 teams did win the Super Bowl, and that team this year was the 49ers. They ended up getting Deion Sanders, which was a massive change, but yeah, it was just the 2 of them all season long. There was no team in the AFC that was even going to come close to them. And the Niners' NFC Championship win was probably their best win in franchise history since their last Super Bowl, as they ended up putting 38 points on the Cowboys, and won in, I guess, controversial fashion, as Michael Irvin still is very passionate that he was interfered by Deion Sanders in a crucial play, but the Niners won anyways, and the Cowboys were denied a three-peat and would go on to play against the fucking Chargers in the Super Bowl, who were just an absolute fraud. Like, this team was dog shit. They had no quarterback and were led by Natron Means, who, don't get me wrong, I love the guy, but come on now. Really? Natron Means? It's just crazy because, guess what? Jerry Rice was still elite even 15 years later, and he had 150 yards and 3 touchdowns in the Super Bowl, all caught from Steve Young, who won the MVP this year and was absolutely unstoppable in the Super Bowl. He had 6 touchdowns, and the Niners did it. They won a Super Bowl without Joe Montana. They did the impossible, and this was also long after Bill Walsh was gone. But this would be the last Niners Super Bowl, still to this very moment. Also, one more thing that I didn't mention from 1994 was Sterling Sharp's neck injury. This was one of the most tragic injuries in NFL history that doesn't get talked about as much, because he led the league in receptions for the last 2 seasons. He was an all-time great talent, and paired with Brett Favre, this dude would have been probably a top 5 receiver ever, but he suffered a career-ending injury, and this really, really hurt the Packers' future. Dallas got one more on the way out. It's a shame because Buffalo was actually pretty good this season, and this was their best chance, but they ended up falling just short, as they would lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were cooking something with head coach Bill Cowher. But anyways, back to the Cowboys. They were good, but this was probably their worst team of the 90s. It was just good enough because the NFL was getting weaker. The Niners were falling off, and there was a new team rising in the NFC by the name of the Green Bay Packers. It's just, they weren't quite ready yet, as they would fall to the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game. But Dallas would move on to the Super Bowl to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were quarterbacked by fucking Neil O'Donnell. Like, really? Neil O'Donnell? That's what we're doing here? Larry Brown, a player who is not all that great for the Cowboys, picked him off twice, and they got one more. They got one more. That's all they needed. But maybe this also was not worth it, as Jerry Jones reportedly, and I mean, he literally reported this himself, said that he sold his soul, basically. He said, God, if you let us get one more Super Bowl win, I won't ask for another one ever again. And what do you know? The Cowboys won this one with their new head coach in Barry Switzer after Jimmy Johnson beef with Jerry Jones. And since this time, have been the only team in the NFC to not make the NFC Championship game. Fast forward to 1996, and yeah, the Cowboys were fading off. The Niners were fading off. And the new teams of the late 90s were fading in. One of them being the Green Bay Packers, but also there were some new teams that weren't supposed to be here. both the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were previous expansion teams, all of a sudden were great. The Jaguars went on a hell of a run, and they made it all the way to the AFC Championship game before falling to the New England Patriots. But just an insane run from them and head coach Tom Coughlin. Just unbelievable. But also, Carolina was also one game short, as they made it all the way to the NFC Championship game and fell to the Green Bay Packers. Now, I already spoiled the Super Bowl a bit, but yeah, Brett Favre was unbelievable this season. He won the MVP, and he was arguably the best player in football, while Reggie White continued to anchor the defense. The Packers were seemingly the team to beat, and they went 13-3 on the regular season. But there were other amazing players this season for sure. Terrell Davis was starting to break out for the Denver Broncos. The 49ers still were really good, with Steve Young still playing solid football, but yeah, man, this was an unreal season. The final four teams left were the Packers, the Panthers, the Jaguars, and the Patriots. And in the end, we got a Drew Bledsoe versus Brett Favre Super Bowl. And the game was iconic. The Packers ended up winning the Super Bowl. Reggie White and Brett Favre held the Lombardi Trophy. And the Green Bay Packers, arguably the most storied franchise in NFL history, one that literally dominated the first hour and a half of this video, are finally talked about again. And the Packers hoisted their own trophy. So the Packers were here, but could anyone challenge them? Well, yes and no. One of the teams to at least put up a fight versus them was the Detroit Lions, and guess who the fuck was carrying them again? Barry Sanders was having an unbelievable season. He had 14 straight 100-yard games in 1997. Still a record. He had 2,053 rushing yards in 14 games, and he only had 53 yards in the first 2 games of the season. So he was technically the MVP of this season, but Brett Favre also was the co-MVP. I don't know why the NFL did this for a bit, but yeah, he was a cheat code. But they lost in the first round anyways. The only team to be able to challenge the Packers seriously was an AFC team. It wasn't the Kansas City Chiefs, who won 13 games because they fell to Denver, but it was Denver themselves. And guess who was their quarterback? It was John Elway still. He was still slinging that football, and he had a cast around him. They now had Mike Shanahan as their head coach, a good defense, and weapons on offense. Rod Smith at wide receiver, Shannon Sharp as the tight end, and Terrell Davis specifically was becoming the best running back in the NFL. And the Denver Broncos were just that team. They were squeaking out wins. It wasn't an absolute dominant affair, but they did make the Super Bowl. And versus the Green Bay Packers, we got a super fun game. John Elway was going back and forth with the MVP Brett Favre, and these were clearly the two best teams in football. So it made it all the more special when the Denver Broncos got the last laugh. John Elway had his iconic helicopter play. He dove for a first down, his old-ass body crinkling with every single hit he took. But the Broncos won, and John Elway finally, after so many Super Bowl defeats, held his very own Vince Lombardi trophy. Jim Kelly and Dan Marino weren't as lucky. The 1998 season began with another legendary draft. The big question being, Ryan Leaf or Peyton Manning? Who do you prefer? And the Chargers got Ryan Leaf. Didn't work out, believe it or not. We'll talk about Peyton a lot for these next hours, but the Vikings this season randomly set the league on fire because they drafted a rookie by the name of Randy Moss, who caught 17 touchdowns as a rookie, which was a record. And the Vikings went 15-1 with Randall Cunningham and Chris Carter anchoring the show, and they seemed to be the best team in the league. The question still remained because although the Vikings were amazing, could anyone beat Denver? And there were a lot of contenders, one of them being the New York Jets. How are the Jets here? How did this happen? Well, it turns out Bill Parcells, and guess who's also here with him? Bill Belichick. Yeah, both of them came and were reinventing what the New York Jets were, as they had an amazing running back in Curtis Martin, and Vinny Testaverde at quarterback provided stable enough play, and they made it all the way to the AFC Championship game, where they would face Denver and would fall. Buffalo had a shot at also being up there in terms of contenders in the AFC, but Jim Kelly wasn't their quarterback. He's been retired for a few years now, and they now had another one by the name of Doug Flutie, who was a 5'10 quarterbacking wizard? I don't know. He's one of the weirdest players ever, as he won 6 MVPs and 4 championships in a different football league, that being the Canadian Football League, but he then came to the NFL at the age of 36 after previously failing, and he was like holding a cane all year long. He was an old-ass dude, but he made a Pro Bowl and brought life into the Bills franchise. They fell to Miami, who then lost to Denver by fucking 40. The 49ers and the Packers had a crazy playoff game where Terrell Owens made what is called the catch-2, but yeah, in the end, people tried, but no one could defeat Denver, as the Minnesota Vikings didn't even get a chance because Gary Anderson shanked a game-winning kick, and the Atlanta Falcons were the team to challenge Denver. But even they didn't bring the artillery that they wanted to, as one of their best players was caught soliciting sex from a undercover police officer. Not ideal there, and the Broncos crushed Atlanta. This game wasn't particularly close, and the Denver Broncos had now two-peated. And Terrell Davis specifically became possibly the greatest playoff running back ever, as he ran for 2,000 yards this year, by the way, and he was carrying the load on offense while John Elway was dealing with injuries. And in his last elite season of his career, in these 3 playoff games, he averaged 26 carries for 156 yards and a touchdown. But there were a lot of notable retirements, as Barry Sanders was gone, and John Elway as well. So the league in the future was turned to the young guys. We just didn't think that one of those young guys was going to be Kurt fucking Warner. He was a literal nobody and was not supposed to ever even take a snap, but the Rams' current quarterback, Trent Green, fucking died in the preseason, which meant that they had to turn to the backup Kurt Warner. And Dick Vermeil, their head coach, was just absolutely devastated that they had to do this, but the grocery bagger stepped up and lit up the entire NFL. They went on a miracle run this season, but they weren't alone, because parity was at an all-time high this season. In Jets land, Bill Belichick was their head coach, but he quit. Yeah, he resigned literally like days after and put his resignation note on a fucking napkin. But I'm sure the Jets will bounce back from this little setback. I'm sure everything's all right. The Buccaneers also had a great defense and were right there all season long. Again, this is another team that I barely talked about, but they ended up facing off against the Rams in the NFC Championship game, but they lost on an incomplete pass. It was a very controversial call that would eventually lead to the Burt Emanuel rule in place now, clarifying what a catch means basically, but the Bucs fell just short and became one of the only defenses to actually clamp the Rams offense, the greatest show on turf. And for the first time, I'm talking about the Tennessee Titans. I've pretty much talked about them before, though, because they were the Houston Oilers, but they were on some insane shit this year. Steve McNair is their quarterback, and he was a monster. The Titans, coached by Jeff Fisher, ended up actually not even winning the division. That went to the Jaguars, who were 14-2, but the Jaguars' 2 regular season losses and their postseason loss were all to the Titans. The Titans beat them 3 times this season and would advance to the Super Bowl themselves. But the only reason they got a chance to play against the Jaguars and play in the Super Bowl was because they had the Music City Miracle. So the Buffalo Bills lost on a last-second fucking lateral. God, Buffalo fans are tortured. But at least it gets better from here for them, right? The Jaguars also dropped a 60-burger on Dan Marino before they fell, so yeah, that ended his career, and this set up a Titans vs. Rams Super Bowl. Finally, the NFL had some parity, and this game was great. Kurt Warner won the Super Bowl. I mean, telling someone that before the year would just be the most unlikely outcome possible, but it's what happened. And Steve McNair almost had the greatest drive in NFL history. He had some insane plays in the final drive of the Super Bowl to match the Kurt Warner touchdown that was just thrown, but they fell 1 yard short. After a tackle, the Rams were victorious. Dick Vermeil won the Super Bowl, and the Rams dynasty seemed to be here as well. And there were some holes that needed to be filled, too. I mean, that doesn't sound very PG, but you know what I mean. The Niners were falling apart. Steve Young's career was ended by Aeneas Williams, and that was it for him. Aikman, Smith, and Irving were done in Dallas, so the Cowboys were no longer here. and there was just a power vacuum in the NFL. The Saints are still ass too. I want to update that because after 1 year of this Ricky Williams, Mike Ditka experiment where he traded away his entire draft and more for a running back, they went 3-13 and he was fired. The Browns are also dealing with a certain controversy. You see, the Cleveland Browns as we know them are actually not the Cleveland Browns. In the modern day, they are the Baltimore Ravens, but things got complicated. Basically, the Browns decided to move the team from Cleveland to Baltimore and rebrand it as the Ravens, so the Browns didn't exist. But then the expansion Cleveland Browns arrived, and they're still shit. So, yeah. That already hurts for the Browns, but what happened in the year 2000 hurt Cleveland fans even more. Because the same team that once donned the orange colors now donned purple and were known as the Ravens, and they had one of the best defenses, if not the best defense, of all time. Through the first 5 games of the 2000 season, they had 3 shutouts, and this team, again, was formed by the Browns GM Ozzie Newsome, and Browns legend Ozzie Newsome too. They had Ray Lewis, Tony Siragusa, Rod Woodson, and they didn't really have an offense, but it's not needed in early 2000s football, I guess. They just ran through the entire NFL this year, but who ended up beating the Rams? Because it seemed like it was going to be their season. Well, the Rams actually fell in just the wild card to the New Orleans Saints, who were one of the stories of the season. But again, the Saints ended up falling to the Vikings. Vikings fell to the Giants, which set up a Giants versus Ravens Super Bowl. And Giants quarterback Kerry Collins had one of the worst playoff performances by any player ever. He had 15 completions for 39 attempts with 4 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. The dude was dog shit. And honestly, this was kind of a boring season, all things considered. There weren't too many crazy narratives. Marshall Faulk won the MVP, but it's kind of really it. So, after the 2000 season, we get into the year of 2001. And you know what, Tom? It's finally your time. Are you happy now? Can you stop bothering me? Fuck! The 2001 season was headlined by the New England Patriots, and specifically Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr., because early on in the season, the Patriots were still being led by Drew Bledsoe. They also had a head coach by the name of Bill Belichick now. You've probably heard of him, but Bledsoe was that guy. Again, he got them to a Super Bowl versus the Green Bay Packers a few years ago, and he still was probably the best quarterback in Patriots history at this point, well over guys like Steve Grogan. But early on in the season versus the Jets, he suffered a almost life-threatening injury at the hands of Mo Lewis. Drew Bledsoe literally almost died, and the Patriots had to turn to their backup, Tom Brady. Now, the irony of this situation is also pretty interesting because the team they were competing with all year and would eventually meet in the Super Bowl was the St. Louis Rams, who, remember, were in the scenario they are in now because of an injury to their starting quarterback as well in Trent Green back in the day. It was Kurt Warner, the backup who became a superstar, versus Tom Brady, the backup who would eventually become a superstar. But there was a lot that happened before that Super Bowl. The Raiders were on the rise at the right time. They had John Gruden and another quarterback who previously was a backup by the name of Rich Gannon, but he turned out to be amazing under the new tutelage of John Gruden, and the Raiders were amazing. They had Charles Woodson, they had everything, and they were not only a threat, but possibly the best team in the AFC on paper, better than the Patriots and Steelers. But you know how the story goes. In the divisional round, the Raiders played the Patriots, and Brady fucking fumbled! But they didn't call it a fumble, it was the tuck rule, and Adam Vinatieri hit 2 clutch kicks. The Patriots won, and would go on to play the Steelers in the AFC Championship game, where they would win. But it wasn't because of Tom Brady. Actually, he got injured, and Drew Bledsoe finished the job, getting the Patriots to the Super Bowl, where Bill Belichick made the tough decision of starting Tom Brady to face the greatest show on turf. Again, the Rams were amazing this season. Kurt Warner won the MVP a year after Marshall Faulk won the MVP, and a year after Warner won the MVP before. So the Rams were just so beyond dominant on offense, and everyone thought that this was the birth of a dynasty. Ricky Proehl, wide receiver for the Rams, said it himself, and he was right. It just wasn't their dynasty. because the Patriots absolutely shocked them. They were blowing out the Rams, and it only took a little bit of a comeback for Kurt Warner to get the Rams back into the game, but Tom Brady and the Patriots pulled it off. They went down the field, and Adam Vinatieri kicked a game-winning field goal. And the Patriots were here now. Fuck, well that was a fun part of the video before, but we are now entering the dark side of everything. And in 2002, though, the Patriots actually fell off just a little bit, and the Raiders rose again. It's such a what if the Tuck rule didn't happen. Would the Raiders be a mini dynasty in the early 2000s? We don't know for sure, but Rich Gannon was so amazing this season, literally out of nowhere. Like I said, the guy was a backup in Kansas City forever, but this year, he fucked around and won the MVP. The Raiders just had a nasty team. They had Tim Brown, one of the best wide receivers of all time. And guess who else was still here and very good at football? Jerry Rice is on the Raiders now and was a very, very valuable piece for them in his fucking 40s. But the Raiders were not immortal because at this point they didn't have head coach John Gruden anymore. He was reportedly also beefing with Al Davis and was traded to Tampa Bay, who had something going themselves. They had an all-time great defense with guys like Derrick Brooks, Rondé Barber. They had dogs all over the place, and they were the best defense in the league. And they ended up playing against the Philadelphia Eagles and Donovan McNabb and Andy Reid, who were also building something, but they were able to knock them out in the playoffs off of an iconic play by Rondé Barber. Meanwhile, around the league, the Texans are here now. They're an expansion franchise, and they're in the midst of sacrificing David Carr's career to the football gods, and the Cleveland Browns made the playoffs. Can you believe that? Good for the Browns, man. And then they utterly collapsed versus the Steelers, so yeah. Besides that, the usual teams were pretty bad, like the Cardinals, and Cowboys have been bottoming out recently. The Lions are terrible, and yeah, that set up a very, very interesting Super Bowl. The Raiders versus the Buccaneers. Again, this was the Gruden Bowl, and no one really knew what to expect, but this is one of the most loaded Super Bowls ever in terms of, like, conspiracy baggage, because even Raiders players believe their head coach, Bill Callahan, purposely sabotaged the team with a terrible game plan, switching it from a run-first approach to just straight-up airing it out. That worked horribly. Their starting center ended up disappearing before the game due to being stressed by the change in the game plan, and the Raiders got obliterated. Rich Gannon had 5 interceptions, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won their first ever Super Bowl under an amazing defense and a dominant performance in the Super Bowl. Okay, but who knows what the future is going to hold, because 2003 had another player rising by the name of Peyton Manning, and the sheriff started just incinerating everything in his path. The Sheriff ended up winning the MVP this year, or he shared it, I guess, with Steve McNair, but I'm not even going to really talk about his 03 season, because it's nowhere near as great as 04, which we'll get to, but this was a scary season because the New England Patriots locked the fuck in, man. This year was honestly wildly uncompetitive, outside of everyone not named the Colts, the Patriots, and the Kansas City Chiefs, shockingly. Since their first Super Bowl win, we haven't really discussed the Chiefs, but guess what? They rose from the ashes with Dick Vermeil and Trent Green, a duo that was supposed to dominate with the Rams, but now here they were healthy in Kansas City, and alongside one of the most underrated seasons of all time from Priest Holmes, who had 27 fucking rushing touchdowns, the Chiefs were a great team, but they weren't great enough to beat Peyton Manning. And again, it was just a fish-eat-fish world. The Chiefs lost to the Colts, and then the Colts lost to the Patriots. And the Patriots would make the Super Bowl, and their team was just disgusting, man. Tom Brady was playing some ridiculously efficient football, and they were just a balanced team from top to bottom. Their defense was unbelievable, with guys like Teddy Bruschi, Rodney Harrison, Ty Law. It was not okay, and they would face the Panthers in the Super Bowl? Yeah, I didn't even mention the Panthers because they were just pretty solid and were a mid-wildcard team, but they ended up winning every single game to make it to the Super Bowl, taking down the Cowboys, the greatest show on turf, and Donovan McNabb and the Eagles to play against the Patriots. And this was just an outcasted team. They had Jake Delhomme at quarterback. They had Munson Muhammad and Steve Smith. Steven Davis was the running back. Like, most of you probably don't know those dudes outside of Steve Smith, obviously. But yeah, Steve Smith was a bad man. And you know what, man? You gotta give the Panthers credit. They fought so hard. They played an amazing football game and pushed the Patriots to their absolute limit. But in the end, Adam Vinatieri did it again. He played another flawless game and kicked another game-winning field goal in the Super Bowl. That's fucking 3 basically at this point if you want to include the clutch tuck rule kicks. And the Patriots won their second Super Bowl in 3 years. And there is more to come. So this is around the time, honestly, where I want to consider it the modern age of football. Not that we're in the passing era yet, but teams from back then would absolutely kick the crap out of a lot of very good teams right now. I'm not sure I can say that about eras like the 70s, but as time goes on, you know, that's pretty common logic, right? Teams and players get better because skill level gets higher, technology becomes more advanced, but I say this to say that 2004 was some of the best football we've ever seen in NFL history. Let me discuss what Peyton Manning did this year because it's not even remotely acceptable. Peyton motherfucking Manning was the best player on the planet. He had a 121 passer rating and, listen closely, a 9.9 touchdown percentage. 10% of all passes on the entire season were scores from anywhere on the field. And he easily won the MVP, and the Colts were still like the 4th best team in the AFC. It was that loaded this year. The Chargers came out of nowhere and were starting to pop off with LaDainian Tomlinson and Drew Brees. The Steelers had Big Ben emerging into a superstar. The Patriots were still the best team in the league, and that's just the AFC, because the NFC had the Eagles and the Packers still playing some great football. The question was, though, was all of this enough to come close to beating the Patriots? And the answer is no. No, it was not. Not even close, man. It wasn't even close to enough, Tom. What the fuck, bro? I hate to say it, man, but the Patriots were just too good. And at this time, the Chargers and Colts were developing choking narratives, so that wasn't ideal for them. And I say Big Ben was emerging as a superstar, but he wasn't quite there yet. He was just a young wee lad, and although the Steelers did go 15-1, like I said in my 15-1 specifically video, this is probably the worst 15-1 team ever, and they ended up getting blasted by the Patriots, and New England made the Super Bowl again, where they would face the Philadelphia Eagles, who in theory had what it took to take down the Patriots, but this was not the right circumstances for Philly. The reason Philly even got here in the first place was the amazing play of Terrell Owens all season. He was combining with Donovan McNabb beautifully, but he ended up breaking his leg in the regular season, and he ended up playing through it in the Super Bowl, which is literally one of the best Super Bowl performances of all time, given the circumstances. Belichick didn't respect him in this game, saying that he basically wouldn't be able to walk. It's impossible for him to be a threat, but he went out there and went 9 for 122. 9 catches for 122 fucking yards in the biggest, most intense game of the season on a broken fucking leg. And the Eagles fell just short. Donovan McNabb had too many turnovers, and the Patriots won the game 24-21. And if it wasn't official yet, it now was. The Patriots were a dynasty, but they would be quiet for a bit. No one really thought that would happen, but hey man, sometimes the real shit is crazier than what is made up, and the Steelers instead look to be taking the AFC for themselves, as the Patriots, they didn't fall off, but they were nowhere near as great of a team as they should have been. They were dealing with some setbacks, specifically players like Teddy Bruschi were not really there anymore. He had suffered a heart attack and was not the same player by the time he would come back, but this was the Steelers' time. Despite other teams like the Broncos rising, it was really the Steelers' conference all year, and like I said, Big Ben was developing very, very well. On and off the court. We don't need to talk about a lot of those allegations today. Not that video. I've made enough jokes. But I will make more. Now, it was the Steelers' division to lose, but the people still wanted to believe in the Colts. Again, Peyton Manning was still probably the best player in the world, but at this point, they just couldn't shake the choker narrative. And yeah, in the playoffs, they lived up to it. After Jerome Bettis fumbled, Big Ben got a shoestring game-saving tackle to keep them alive, but the Colts choked again. Their kicker fucked it up completely, and the Steelers knocked out the Colts in the playoffs. But meanwhile, in the NFC, things were a bit different too. The Buccaneers were still pretty solid, the Panthers were solid, but it really was wide open, and it was the Seattle Seahawks that seized this opportunity. Led by the MVP of the NFL and running back Shaun Alexander, and their new head coach Mike Holmgren, who you remember from Green Bay, they were amazing this season. They didn't have insane quarterback play with Matt Hasselbeck. Hell, they didn't even have like a suffocating defense. They were just a balanced team, and that was enough to make it all the way to the Super Bowl to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, this game is shrouded in controversy as well. This is a very questionable officiated game for sure, and it's kind of odd because there's a lot of factors pointing the Steelers' way. The game was held in Detroit for one thing, which was Jerome Bettis' hometown, and he was set to retire after this game, win or lose. But throughout the game, there was a lot of questionable calls as well. Ben Roethlisberger had a QB sneak that was called a touchdown, and there were some other odd pass interference calls. But the most damning thing about this game is that referee Bill Levy admitted that he made some bad calls, so rigged or not, it was not a great officiated game. But the Seattle Seahawks still fell in the Super Bowl, and the Pittsburgh Steelers got their first Super Bowl win since Terry Bradshaw left. But alright, can someone lock the fuck in here, please? Peyton, can we not just like choke every year? It's not that it was all his fault, but hey man, results are results, and the Steelers, Colts, and Patriots were going to be battling for this entire season. And there was also another contender with them now, too. The Ravens had risen up and had one of the best defenses of all time, again, alongside a new competitor to join Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, and the Chargers were amazing, too, led by the MVP LaDainian Tomlinson, who had possibly the greatest season by any running back ever, and the best fantasy season ever, too, as this season, he logged 481 fantasy points. He averaged 28.2 fantasy points per game. But yes, they had a new quarterback in Phillip Rivers, and under head coach Marty Schottenheimer, they were not going to make any mistakes in the big game because the Chargers never choke, and Marty has no reputation for choking either. So when they intercepted a pass versus the Patriots in the playoffs, they clearly just fell on the ball and didn't fumble it right back to them. No, that didn't happen. Surely not. Yeah, the Chargers choked, but all right, Colts, you're our last hope. Can you please not choke? This was the big moment for them. It was the AFC Championship game, Patriots-Colts, the two best teams in football to many, playing for the rights to the Super Bowl. And this game was an all-time classic. Both teams just went back and forth, but it didn't start out that way. The Patriots were blowing out the Colts, but Indianapolis rallied back. And it was not a pretty performance by either quarterback in Brady and Manning, but the defensive play is what got it done, and a late interception by Tom Brady ended the game. And finally, fucking finally, Peyton Manning, who many have believed is the best player in football since even the turn of the millennium, has made the Super Bowl. And I feel like this is how it's been in recent years, where I'm just only talking about the AFC, and then I'm like, yeah, this NFC team is also here, but yeah, that's kind of how it was. I mean, there were good teams, too. The Saints were building something now with Drew Brees and Sean Payton in their post-Hurricane Katrina era, but the Chicago Bears made it out of the NFC. Again, this wasn't an amazing team by nowadays standards, and even this year's standards, but Rex Grossman at quarterback is always going to be rough. But hey, they got to the Super Bowl. They had Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs as punishing linebackers. Mike Brown was elite before his injury, and Devin Hester was a problem. He returned the Super Bowl opening kickoff for a touchdown right away, and it is still, to this moment, one of the most electric plays in NFL history. Again, I mentioned the Mike Brown injury a little bit, but I think if he played for this entire season, specifically this Super Bowl game, things would have been different for the Bears. But in the end they fell just short. It was a rainy Super Bowl, and the Colts leaned on the run game along with safe play from Peyton Manning, and they won the game. They were just the better team, simply. And Peyton Manning got his first Super Bowl. And hopefully there was more to come. There was not more to come, because 2007. 2007. Tom, do you remember that year? What do you remember about the brilliant year of 2007? Well, I'll tell you what he remembers. He remembers throwing it to Randy fucking Moss. Because Randy, meanwhile, was very upset in Oakland, and was winning absolutely nothing, believe it or not. And after the Raiders failed to trade Randy Moss for Aaron Rodgers because they, forgot or something, Brady got Randy Moss as a weapon for basically free, and he ended up going nuclear, having one of the best quarterback seasons ever. He was the near unanimous MVP with 4,806 yards, 50 touchdowns, which was an NFL record, and Randy Moss had 23 touchdown catches, finally breaking Jerry Rice's record from that strike-shortened season. The Patriots were just fuming this season. They wanted revenge for a certain thing called Spygate, which recently is gaining a little bit more popularity as Bill Belichick was not elected for the Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. But what even was Spygate? Well, it basically was started by the former prodigy of Bill Belichick himself, Eric Mangini, who was now with the Jets, and he snitched on Bill. He was like, "They're filming me! I don't like this! They're ruining my chances to beat the Patriots!" And yeah, he reported them to the league, and the league was not happy with them. But the Patriots didn't give a shit and won every single fucking game this regular season, becoming the first team and the only team in NFL history to go 16-0 in the regular season. Because remember, the schedule was shorter back when the 72 Dolphins did it. But anyways, let's talk about some things other than the Colts and the fucking Patriots, because that is what most of this decade is. The 2007 NFL Draft was ridiculous. Adrian Peterson, Calvin Johnson, Joe Thomas, Patrick Willis, Marshawn Lynch, Darrelle Revis, Joe Staley, and Jamarcus Russell. I will not be discussing Jamarcus Russell. And Adrian Peterson was just a monster right away. He had the single-game rookie rushing record with 296 and easily won the Offensive Rookie of the Year, while Patrick Willis won the Defensive Rookie of the Year. And this was just a crazy year for awards, too, by the way. Brady won the MVP. Bob Sanders, Defensive Player of the Year. Insane safety for the Colts when healthy. And the receiving leader was Reggie Wayne for the Colts, Peyton Manning's second option. So, just a crazy, crazy year in terms of power level. But there was more going on in the NFL in terms of narratives, too. Because meanwhile, in the NFC, the Green Bay Packers were a great team again. But Aaron Rodgers, their recently drafted quarterback, was sitting behind Brett Favre during this time. And at the age of 38, Brett Favre was still balling out of his mind. But this was his last season in Green Bay. And in the playoffs, they suffered an overtime upset loss to Eli Manning and the Giants on a pretty bad pick by Brett Favre. And the Aaron Rodgers era would thus begin. And to talk about other narratives during this time, Michael Vick, the once great quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, was not there anymore because of an issue that happened with some dogs. The Miami Dolphins almost went 0-16 and fucking barely snuck out a singular win, and the playoffs went pretty crazy. Like I said, the Giants ended up beating the Packers in the NFC Championship game, but the AFC was a little bit more different. The fucking Chargers barely beat the Colts in the divisional round to face the New England Patriots in the AFC Championship game. But the Patriots were honestly nowhere near the immortal team they once were. And they basically got a free ride to the Super Bowl because they would play against the Chargers, but their quarterback, Phillip Rivers, tore his ACL. He still fucking played through it because he's an animal, but he was nowhere near the same guy he was, and the Patriots and Giants would be set up for the Super Bowl. And I think a lot of you know how this ends. Yeah, Eli Manning did some fucking bullshit, man, but still, I cannot understate how much of an upset this was. Again, was this Patriots team as good as the team they fielded in the regular season? No, they were still battling injuries. Tom Brady was banged up, but still, this was a game they should win 99 times out of 100. It just so happens that one singular game was the Super Bowl. And the Patriots had every opportunity, but they gave the Giants too much time. And on the final fucking drive of the Super Bowl, Eli Manning almost threw 2 picks, he fumbled, he got it back, there was the helmet catch, the Plaxico touchdown, and the Patriots lost. Somewhere across the globe, the Dolphins popped their champagne and celebrated their undefeated season, remaining the only one in NFL history, and the Patriots lost the perfect season to Eli fucking Manning. So okay, the Patriots were already pissed before the year, and now they're even more mad, but it doesn't matter, because Bernard Pollard hates the Patriots even more, and he assassinated Tom Brady, and he was out for the season, so the Patriots were just fucked. Also, though, with the Patriots gone, there was an open seat for not only the AFC, but for the division, and the Dolphins had one of the craziest turnarounds ever, as remember, they went 1-15 last year, but this season, they used the Wildcat formation and took the league by storm, famously beating the Patriots early on in the season, and with Ricky Williams and Ronnie Brown as a running back duo, they were a gimmick team, but they ended up going 11-5, so say what you want. Yes, they didn't do great in the playoffs, but going from 1-15 to 11-5 is insane. Meanwhile, the Lions just continued being the Lions, as they went 0-16 this season famously, with the headline of the season being Dan Orlovsky stepping out of the end zone. A really, really fucking rough season for a dog shit franchise, but hopefully this is the pinnacle of it, and the Bobby Lane curse will go away. It didn't go away. Matt Ryan had one of the greatest debut rookie years of all time, even though no one really cares about it. He was really good, but the MVP went to Peyton Manning. The Offensive Player of the Year went to Drew Brees. So yeah, without Tom Brady being there, those two dudes stepped up, and again, the Super Bowl was pretty wide open. The Giants actually had a great season too. You'd think that they would have just gone right back to being shit, but nah, Eli Manning had probably his best year as a pro, but then his top option, Plaxico Burress, fucking shot himself and was injured and suspended, so that's great. That ended that, and meanwhile, Brett Favre was doing pretty well with the Jets until he got injured and then took a picture of his penis. As one tends to do, right? But even with all of this bullshit going on this season, of course there's more, because the Arizona Cardinals made the Super Bowl. The Patriots go down for one season and the entire fabric of reality for football just falls apart. I mean, the Cardinals were such a wild team. They weren't even supposed to have the quarterback they had, but here he was, and it was Kurt Warner. It was supposed to be Matt Leinart. He was their top first-round pick to be developed and formed into a franchise quarterback, but Kurt Warner was just better. So, yeah, a bit unideal for them. And the Cardinals actually just got here off of miracle after miracle. Kurt Warner was making magic happen, and combining with Hall of Fame wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald, they had an offense that could contend with anyone. But in the Super Bowl, they would face the Pittsburgh Steelers. Many thought it would be the Colts, but the Colts fell right away to the Chargers, and then eventually the Chargers would fall to the Steelers. So here we were again. Pittsburgh in the Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger versus the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, we've seen Kurt Warner before, but what the fuck are the Cardinals doing here? Surely they're going to get blown out, but no. Instead, we got possibly, and I think undebatably, a top 5 Super Bowl of all time. This game had 2 top 10 plays ever in it, both benefiting one team. And when that happens, it's tough to overcome it. Because although the Cardinals took a lead late in the game off of a Larry Fitzgerald touchdown, the early James Harrison full length of the field pick 6, and eventually the Santonio Holmes back of the end zone touchdown grab was too much. And the Cardinals, in their first and only Super Bowl appearance, would lose. And the Steelers won another piece of hardware. 2009 now starts with a bit of tragedies, to be honest with you. And now the NFL will eventually get under a lot more hot water, but a story that always goes under the radar for me is that Dante Stallworth, a receiver who would eventually play for the Patriots, ended up pleading guilty to vehicular manslaughter as he killed a man in a DUI car crash. But he comes back and plays, so don't worry about that. But also, the murder of Steve McNair was another massive headline. He was a controversial person off the field, but on the field, he just played some solid football. He recently was on the Ravens and almost got them to the Super Bowl, but he fell just short. Anyways, though, in the offseason, he was cheating on his wife with a woman who ended up doing a murder-suicide with Steve McNair. But the New Orleans Saints were the story of the season in a more positive light, because again, they were still dealing with the repercussions of Hurricane Katrina, and the city was still suffering, so they needed a team like the Saints to bring everyone together, and they did just that. There's been 2 team races before in previous seasons. I think back to like the Raiders and Steelers years of the 70s, but 2009 was another one of those years. It was the Colts, and it was the Saints. And for the first time in NFL history, 2 teams had a chance to go undefeated, and they fell just short. The Saints ended up being 13-0 at one point, while the Colts were 14-0. But the Saints kind of just flopped a little bit to end the year. Well, the Colts pretty much did go 16-0, but they ended up pulling their players for the final 2 games of the season. Still, though, this led to a Peyton Manning MVP, and he is just farming them at this point. The Patriots were falling off a little bit with age and injuries still, so yeah, it really was just the Saints and the fucking Colts. The Eagles were making some noise late, though, with their new quarterback by the name of Michael Vick, and he was pretty great this season. There were some other great players, too, around the league, with Chris Johnson popping up out of nowhere and running for 2,000 yards and breaking the single-season yards record from scrimmage. But things got a little tricky in the playoffs, because eventually it would come out that the Saints were employing Bountygate, where defensive coordinator Greg Williams and possibly Sean Payton were encouraging their players to injure other players. And against older quarterbacks in the playoffs, in Kurt Warner and Brett Favre, yeah, that's not a good recipe. And they basically ended Kurt Warner's career by intentionally injuring him, and the same with Brett Favre in the NFC Championship game. But again, if you're an old quarterback in the NFL, you're tough as shit. So those 2 went down with a fucking fight. But yeah, Brett Favre ended up throwing a pass across his body for an interception, and the Colts and the Saints would meet in the Super Bowl. And this game was, I don't want to say an all-time classic, but it was an amazing football game, which eventually came down to a pick 6 from Tracy Porter, and the Saints won the game and won the Super Bowl. Drew Brees was the Super Bowl MVP, and New Orleans had some hardware for their first time and only time in franchise history. We now get into 2010, and oh my gosh, the Detroit Lions are somewhat a good NFL team? Are you serious? Well, yeah, kinda. They now had rookie Ndamukong Suh, who was anchoring a solid defense, and Calvin Johnson was an all-time great talent. I could nerd out about him forever, but all you need to know is he was bigger, faster, and stronger than every single fucking DB and wide receiver in the league, and combining him with an all-time great talent in Matthew Stafford as well, would you look at that? But the Lions were pretty good. Except they, weren't. They weren't good. Yeah, despite all the talent, they won 6 games and just, were most notable this season for having their assistant, driving through a Wendy's drive-thru butt naked. But don't worry, it's fine. He blamed it on drinking, which makes the driving part of it okay, of course. Classic Detroit Lions shenanigans. But the story of this season was not the Patriots, who were revived and won 14 games, the Colts and Steelers, who were still great, but it was the Seattle Seahawks, who won 7 games, 1 more game than the Lions, but they ended up winning the division at 7 wins and had an insane playoff run. And by insane, I mean they knocked the fucking shit out of the New Orleans Saints, the defending champion New Orleans Saints. And Marshawn Lynch, their running back, famously had one of the greatest, if not the greatest runs of all time, when he ran through everyone, stiff-armed multiple dudes to the floor, and jumped in the end zone for a run that was so loud it registered on the fucking seismograph. But they would fall to Chicago in the next round, and Marshawn Lynch was clamped. And Chicago had Jay Cutler now, who was brought in from Denver, and a great defense still led by Brian Urlacher. And they would go on to face their rival in the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Championship game. But B.J. Raji had other plans. The big-ass D-tackle dropped back into coverage and picked off Jay Cutler and took it to the house. But again, another one of the massive stories of this year was the Green Bay Packers, led by Aaron Charles Rodgers, and he had finally arrived given his chance with Brett Favre out of the picture, he went on an absolute heater this season. Now, also, meanwhile, Brett Favre had his Iron Man streak of 297 consecutive starts finally come to an end. But back to Rodgers and the Packers, because Rodgers was phenomenal, specifically in the playoffs, getting the Packers to the Super Bowl, and he was proving that he was the future face of the league once the old dudes like Tom and Peyton phase out. But Tom was still cooking for now. He was the unanimous MVP this season, but you won't believe this. The Patriots were knocked out of the playoffs by the New York Jets, who were led by Rex Ryan, as you may now know as a commentator who just blabbers and says shit, and their quarterback was Mark Sanchez. I was there for this playoff run. I consciously remember it, but still, saying that out loud, that Tom Brady and Belichick were knocked out by Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez, is insane to say. But the Jets, after knocking out the Patriots in the divisional round, ended up choking versus the Steelers in the AFC Championship game, which set up Packers versus Steelers. And Green Bay was just too battle-tested. They got here off of 3 road games, and they won the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers went crazy. The Packers took an early lead and just held on to it. They had a strong defense with Charles Woodson, Clay Matthews, and more, and they did it. The Packers won the Super Bowl, and they look to be the new dynasty finally. So in 2011, did the Packers dynasty finally come to fruition? Well, kinda, yeah. It was clear that Aaron Rodgers was now unquestionably the best player in the league, which is insane because remember, last year, Tom Brady just won the unanimous MVP, but this was a special season. Aaron Rodgers had the best MVP year of all time. And I say that even saying all that I did about Manning's 04 year, this season was just better. 45 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 122.5 passer rating. I don't even need to get into the advanced stats. That's just not okay. But it's a shame because Drew Brees and Tom Brady also went ballistic. Brees threw for 5,476 yards with a 71.6 completion percentage. Peyton Manning wasn't here because he was out for the season with a neck injury, but yeah, I mean, all these guys were good, but they weren't as good as Tim Tebow. Yeah, Tim Tebow was here now and was the quarterback of the Denver Broncos. Was he good at all? No, not even remotely, as the Broncos won the division, winning 8 games. But this was just a wild year that was headlined by one of the wildest games of all time, as in the wild card versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Broncos were victorious. They won the game on a last-second overtime walk-off touchdown to Demaryius Thomas, but there were weird parallels with the John 3:16 verse that Tebow was famous for. He ended up throwing for 316 yards, averaged 31.6 per completion, and the Steelers had the ball for 31 minutes and 6 seconds. Just a little odd. Anyway, you wouldn't believe what other bullfuckery happened this season because out of every amazing team in the NFC, the Packers, the Saints, hell, the Lions were pretty good. It was the New York Giants who overcame all of them again. Specifically also beating the best team in the NFC, who I still haven't talked about, in the San Francisco 49ers, who were being revived under their new head coach in Jim Harbaugh, leveraging their amazing defensive talent with dudes like Aldon Smith, Justin Smith, Navarro Bowman, and Patrick Willis. But they just couldn't beat Eli. It didn't matter, because Kyle fucking Williams fumbled twice, and Eli Manning pulled off some bullshit again to reach the Super Bowl, where they would play the New England Patriots. Now, the Patriots were also only here because they played the Ravens in the AFC Championship game, and Billy Cundiff had the biggest choke in franchise fucking history for them, and they lost, so okay, this is still an amazing Patriots team, but they just haven't gotten over the hump since their last Super Bowl victory so long ago. It's almost been a decade at this point, but again, Eli fucking bitched him. I just don't understand how he kept doing it, but he threw an insane late-game pass to Mario Manningham, a perfect fucking throw, and the Giants knocked off the Patriots again. By this point, Tom Brady must have been contemplating just going into a cave and living there eternally, but they did it again. I mean, I don't know how the fuck it keeps happening, Tom. At this point, I don't have any answers, bro. It's just impressive. So, okay, the Giants are fresh off of being the worst fucking Super Bowl winning team of all time, and I'm glad to see it. But 2012, we got a new influx of talent into the league, specifically at the quarterback position. Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III, and Russell Wilson were all rookie quarterbacks that led their teams to playoff appearances, and Russell Wilson and RG3 would play in the wild card. And that was the end of RG3's career, so yeah. But the 49ers now had a new quarterback as well. Yeah, they were just in the NFC Championship game, but now Colin Kaepernick was calling the show, and he was amazing this season. He was using his legs to the likes of which we hadn't really seen from any quarterback yet, although there were still some, like Cam Newton was emerging, but Kaepernick set the league on fire, and the Niners looked like the best team in football. Adrian Peterson had an insane year, running for 2,000 yards and winning the MVP after tearing his ACL, and the playoffs were just immaculate. It was the same players, but on different teams in different situations. Peyton Manning came back from his neck injury and was in Denver lighting up the league. He threw 37 touchdowns on the season, but he fell to the Ravens in the divisional round in an all-time great overtime playoff game, and the Ravens seemed like the team of destiny, as they made it all the way to the Super Bowl, blowing out the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, where they would face the San Francisco 49ers. And interestingly, by the way, the Packers have fallen off a fucking cliff, so much for that dynasty, as they were not able to overcome the Niners in the playoffs, but Niners-Ravens Super Bowl. The Harbaugh Bowl. Jim Harbaugh versus John Harbaugh. And the Ravens won. It was one of, again, the most controversial Super Bowls ever for a multitude of reasons, one being the blackout that happened, which ended up giving the Niners momentum to climb back into the game after getting blown out, but the game also ended on a controversial no call and a holding, and the Niners lost. The Ravens were victorious. Joe fucking Flacco, and the Ravens won the Super Bowl. This was Ed Reed and Ray Lewis's last game as Ravens, and they retired on top. Now, again, I do not like to simplify seasons like this, but 2013 was a three-man race. Three-team race, specifically. The Seahawks, the Broncos, and the Niners were the only three teams that really could win the Super Bowl. You could throw the Patriots in there too, of course, because they're always a contender, but let's talk about the Seahawks specifically. You already know what the Niners got going on. Great defense, Kaepernick, you know the deal, but the Seahawks had the Legion of Boom. Cam Chancellor, Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Brandon Browner, and that was just the fucking secondary, basically. They were an unbelievable defense that spawned in out of amazing drafting by Seattle. That's pretty much what's going on today, too, by the way. So they were amazing. They also had a Hall of Fame quarterback in Russell Wilson, Marshawn Lynch, Doug Baldwin. They were an unbelievable team, but were they better than Denver? Because Denver had possibly the greatest offensive season ever. Peyton Manning, at the age of fucking 95, had 55 touchdowns, 5,477 passing yards, and so many more fucking records were shattered, because both the passing touchdowns and passing yardage record was set by him this season. And this was the highest scoring offense in history, scoring 606 points, and he won another MVP! Now, I say the Patriots fell off, but a lot of it was dealing with internal issues, because the Aaron Hernandez situation had previously happened, and they had to cut him, and that wasn't great for his look or the NFL's image as a whole. And there was a lot more problems for the NFL also, because there was a bullying scandal too, which was going on during this time, and it was huge national news, as a player by the name of Richie Incognito was bullying Jonathan Martin, so just had to throw that out there. A lot of random stuff happened this season too. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, Chip Kelly was their head coach now, and with Nick Foles as his quarterback, he randomly had one of the best fucking seasons by any quarterback kind of ever, but specifically this season too. And this was a league with Prime Rodgers, Brady, Manning, and Breeze. And Nick Foles was up there. The Colts were fun this year too. They had Andrew Luck, who was becoming a future superstar, and they had a massive comeback versus the Chiefs, as they came back and won the game 45-44, and winning the second largest playoff comeback ever at the time. But this still was the Seahawks and Broncos Super Bowl to play, and Seattle understood that destiny as they defeated the Niners in the NFC Championship game off of Richard Sherman's tip, and here we were. The greatest defense versus the greatest offense. Which team prevailed? And it was the Seahawks. And it happened from the first fucking play of the game, as the Broncos fumbled the snap and Seattle just boat rushed them the entire time. This was the most dominant Super Bowl of all time, in my mind, given how great both teams were. The Broncos were an amazing team, but Seattle didn't even make it close. And the Seahawks won their first Super Bowl in franchise history. So talks of a Seahawks dynasty were beginning. I mean, this team was absurdly young. They had a superstar at quarterback, a superstar corner, a superstar safety, fucking two of them, and they were not going to slow down. But the Niners were, as Jim Harbaugh beefed with the front office, and they dealt with a lot of injuries as well, so they were going to be in hibernation for a bit, but they'll be back, and there were a lot of new talented players that came into the league this year. 2014 was one of the best draft classes of all time, and Odell Beckham, specifically, had one of the best rookie years ever. He was going to be a superstar for the next decade, unless something got in the way of that, but he led the league in receiving yards per game at 108 and had one of the greatest catches ever. And I feel like I'm saying the words of all time, ever, very fucking leniently, but I'm serious, guys. Like, these plays and moments that happen every year, some of them are just special, and this specifically was one of them. I don't think I've ever seen a better catch in my life, and this went beyond just being an amazing catch. It was a cultural moment as well. Oh, the Browns also drafted Johnny Manziel because a homeless man said so that's pretty fucking amazing, but the Patriots were meanwhile dealing with Deflategate, because in their 45-7 AFC Championship win versus the Colts this season, people thought that they deserved to suffer for their cheating ways. The Patriots clearly deflated the footballs on purpose, and Brady would eventually be suspended 4 games in 2016, but yeah, the Patriots were dealing with that before the Super Bowl. Now, I know I did spoil things a bit, but things were not always great for the Patriots this season. Earlier in the season, they got blown out by the Chiefs, and Tom Brady was benched, but they were able to rebound and, yes, make it all the way to the Super Bowl, defeating Andrew Luck in the process. The Ravens were also falling off of a cliff because Ray Rice ended up doing the thing with his fiancée, so yeah, I'm sure you've heard of that, but yeah, the NFL was having a horrible image during this time for domestic violence crimes, as Adrian Peterson was also suspended for beating his son, and don't even get me started on Greg Hardy, man. That's a whole nother thing, too. Just not an ideal year for the league, but there was still some great football that was played, as J.J. Watt had probably the best year of any defensive tackle this decade, not named Aaron Donald, who was also drafted in 2014, but J.J. Watt was robbed of the MVP, honestly, but it ended up going to Aaron Rodgers, who brought his Packers all the way to the divisional round to play against the Dallas Cowboys, who were also reborn too, with Tony Romo, DeMarco Murray, and Des Bryant. They were a ruthless offense, but you all know what happens. Romo threw a perfect pass to Des Bryant, who caught it and didn't score. They ruled it incomplete, and the Cowboys lost the game. But karma came knocking for the Packers the very next week, as in the NFC Championship game, they had a meltdown for the ages. One of the greatest meltdowns ever. They dropped an onside kick. They allowed this fucking 2-point conversion, and Russell Wilson's absolute dime to Jermaine Kearse on perfect coverage brought the Seahawks to another Super Bowl. And the Seahawks and Patriots would face off in Super Bowl 49, becoming the best Super Bowl ever to many. It was just a back-and-forth contest, a beautiful narrative going into it too. The future dynasty versus the dynasty of old. And the Patriots were just inevitable. Tom Brady played an amazing football game, and the Patriots battled the whole time, blow for blow. It was poetry, but in the end, it looked like the Seahawks were going to pull it off. After Jermaine Kearse's famous ricochet catch, all the Seahawks had to do was run it on the 1-yard line, and they didn't. They threw a game-losing interception. Malcolm Butler, a rookie, got the pick, and the Patriots were fucking back. They won the Super Bowl 28-24. And we're really gonna let this happen again? We're letting the Patriots come back from the dead? 2015, can someone please come in and stop them? Because the Seahawks would soon fall off, for reasons that still cannot be fucking fully explained, but Seems like we got a new savior, and his name was Cameron Newton, who I talked about just a little bit, but he truly broke out this season. He had 45 total touchdowns and won the MVP, and the Panthers were a juggernaut. They went 15-1, almost went undefeated, and they had Cam Newton, Luke Kuechly. Josh Norman was a great corner this season and was fighting with Odell, but they were the best team in the league by far, and the question was, who could challenge them? The Patriots were still really good as always. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers ended up starting in a bit of a hole this season, but they started to run the fucking table, and they managed to squeak into the playoffs. And Rodgers just had an insane season. In terms of just a highlight reel alone, he was crazy. He had a Hail Mary versus the Lions, and then versus the Cardinals, he had 2 fucking Hail Marys in the same drive, and they fell just short in still my favorite game ever. The Cardinals were also really good this year, but they just suffered too many injuries. Tyrann Mathieu, their star safety, was out for the year, and Carson Palmer dealt with a hand injury and was not the same player. And they got absolutely fed to the fucking wolves by the Carolina Panthers, who made the Super Bowl. But again, what happened to Seattle? Well, they actually made the playoffs this year, and were about to lose to the Vikings, who were led by Teddy Bridgewater and were on death's door. All that stood between the Seahawks and elimination was a 27-yard field goal, which was shanked. Yeah, that ended Blair Walsh's career. He was never the fucking same again. And the insanity of these playoffs just continued, because in the AFC, the Steelers and the Bengals played against each other. And this was a game of the backups. Ben Roethlisberger got injured, and at one point we got Landry Jones versus A.J. McCarron. But the Steelers were fucked. Antonio Brown was the best wide receiver in football. He was having historic seasons before this and would go on to be even fucking better in 2017, but he suffered an absolutely devastating hit at the hands of Vontaze Burfict. But this hit won them the game. This resulted in a double penalty on Burfict, and Adam Jones started screaming at the ref, being another penalty, and the Steelers went from being mathematically dead to kicking a walk-off game-winning field goal. But everyone just fell to Denver. They could not get past the Broncos' defense. And specifically, their offense was awful. They had a terrible offense. They were quarterbacked by Brock Osweiler for a majority of the season, but he was way better than Peyton Manning. Manning was atrocious this season. His arm didn't work anymore. And win or lose, this was his last season in the league, which was a sad way to watch a legend go out, but their defense was just top 1. Von Miller was the best fucking defender in the league. They had DeMarcus Ware, Chris Harris Jr., Aqib Talib. They had no weaknesses, and they knew it. And the Broncos would meet the Panthers in the Super Bowl after knocking out the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. And we got a pretty mid Super Bowl, all things considered, but in games like this, experience and defense usually win out. And the Broncos had both, as Denver ended up clamping the Panthers' offense, and Von Miller was just unstoppable. And the Denver Broncos won Super Bowl 50, and Peyton Manning held up the Lombardi Trophy and retired as a 2-time Super Bowl champion. And in 2016, oh god, they're fucking back. Even though Brady was suspended to start the year, the Patriots went 14-2 and were the best team in the NFL. It's the same old shit with them, man. They built a new defense, but it's still Tom Brady, their Hall of Fame tight end Rob Gronkowski, Julian Edelman, and Bill Belichick is still calling the shots on defense. But there were a lot of new names this season that dominated the league. Matt Ryan wasn't a new name, but led by their offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan, they had an insanely efficient offense. Matt Ryan had a 117 passer rating with 38 touchdowns this season, which isn't 2011 Rodgers great, but when you're compared to the best season of all time, that's insane, and that was good enough for him to win the MVP. Alongside his Hall of Fame receiver in Julio Jones, they also had a good defense too somehow, with Vic Beasley. Yeah, that's never a person that I'm going to say again. The Dallas Cowboys are here too, by the way, as they drafted 2 rookies this year by the name of Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott, and they came in at the perfect time. This team was so fun to watch. They were pulling off insane wins every year, and they went 13-3 and were seemingly going to be the best team in the NFC. But Aaron Rodgers said otherwise. The motherfucker hates the Cowboys, and He went insane in the playoffs. He threw one of the best passes of his career to Jared Cook to set up a game-winning field goal. And the Packers ripped Dallas's heart out in just their first playoff game. Raiders were also pretty good this year. Keyword being were. All I'm going to say is Derek Carr broke his leg. Don't want to talk about this anymore. But with the Cowboys gone, this set up an NFC championship between the Falcons and the Packers. And Atlanta just blew the doors off of them. Honestly, you got to give credit to Matt Ryan. He played an amazing postseason. And he got the Falcons to their second Super Bowl in franchise history. Where meanwhile, no one was standing up to the Patriots. Absolutely no one. They obliterated everyone on their path to making the Super Bowl. Where, Tom, this is your time, buddy. You want to have a word with the audience? Tell us what happened on that fateful day. He's a little shy. I'll just take over. Yeah, 28-3 happened. The Patriots went down 28-3, but managed to come back and win the game. Although by the numbers, this isn't the greatest comeback in playoff history, by sheer weight of the situation, of the fucking Super Bowl being a factor, it is. It is one of the most iconic games in sports history. And they just did everything wrong. Kyle Shanahan and the Falcons pressed every wrong button and lost the game. And even when all-time players made all-time plays, like when Julio Jones made one of the greatest catches in Super Bowl history, they proceeded to waste it with holdings, sacks, bad play calls, all of it just managed to contribute to the biggest meltdown we will ever see. Julian Edelman had a circus catch, Tom Brady played locked-in football, and the Patriots won the Super Bowl. Just absolutely unbelievable still to this day. And this is when football really becomes nostalgic for me, because in 2017, the Philadelphia Eagles rose from the ashes and were an amazing team. They had a great defense, but the head of their team was Carson Wentz. The former second overall pick in the draft was developing into a superstar and was going to win the MVP, but late in the season, he was injured in a game versus Sean McVay and the Rams, and he would never return this season, meaning they would turn the reins to Nicholas Foles. Luckily for them, though, Nicholas Foles has a large penis. We'll talk about that more in a second. Anyway, just to talk about the Rams a little bit more, because yeah, Sean McVay was at the time the youngest head coach in NFL history, but he rejuvenated the Rams and revived the first overall pick in that Carson Wentz draft, Jared Goff. But they also had Todd Gurley, a great defense, and a ton of other weapons like Cooper Kupp. So yeah, the Rams were going to be here for a bit. Well, let's talk about some shit that was going on this season, because in Buffalo land, haven't discussed them in a long time, I will in a bit when they get a quarterback, but their quarterback this season was Nathan Peterman for a lot of the time. Now, he ended up throwing 5 picks and a half, and the Bills were not doing too well. The Browns also fucking did it. They went 0-16. Hugh Jackson is that guy. It was just peak dysfunction from them this season. And even funnier, they tried to trade for A.J. McCarron and ended up fucking it up, but it actually worked out for them because he wasn't that good. And they also allegedly interviewed Condoleezza Rice for a coaching job. She was the Secretary of fucking State, but at least the Browns bounced back next year. They didn't. They won 1 game. Also, Blake Martinez led the league in tackles, and he was just probably the worst player to ever do that, which is pretty mean. I mean, I'm sorry about that, Blake, but yeah, not a very great player, and most notably, he would be known for being signed to the Raiders and then retiring and scamming people for millions on fucking Pokemon cards. Speaking of, in terms of more sadness and losing your faith in humanity, Odell Beckham's season was completely ended when he was injured versus the Chargers, and this was basically the end of his superstar career, and he was never the same player again. And even weirder is that Jacksonville was great this season. They were known as Saxonville now. They had Calais Campbell, Jalen Ramsey, Yannick Ngakoue, and Leonard Fournette was a bruising running back. But they were an amazing team, and they were up there with the Steelers and Patriots for the top contenders in the AFC. And the Steelers still had Le'Veon Bell, their great running back, Ben Roethlisberger, and Antonio Brown. 3 of the best players at their positions, but it wasn't enough. They fell to the Jaguars, and Blake Bortles fucking got to the AFC Championship game. In that game, though, they would fall to the Patriots. Did they get robbed off of Miles Jack being called down after a forced fumble? Yes, but in the end, the Jaguars had chances to win, but they could not get past an injured Tom Brady, and the Patriots would make the Super Bowl again. And meanwhile, NFC land was just going ballistic too. I couldn't even tell you what was going on. 2017 is a season to the likes of which we will never see again. I've already made a video on that before, but looking back at it, it's still so crazy. The Vikings beat the Saints just barely off of Stephon Diggs getting the Minneapolis Miracle. Diggs' sideline touchdown will forever be remembered in NFL lore. But the Eagles made it to the fucking Super Bowl. They were the best team in the league all year, but with Nick Foles, they were an underdog in every playoff game they faced in. But they ended up beating every team. They destroyed the Vikings in the NFC Championship game, and Case Keenum, who was their quarterback, we got a Nick Foles, Case Keenum NFC Championship game, which set up Patriots-Eagles. Another one of the best Super Bowls ever. The horrors that Tom Brady must have been thinking in the aftermath of this game, I can't even imagine, because he played the best Super Bowl of his career and was still outplayed by Nick Foles. Nick Foles fucking was just... he was a backup. He was a backup quarterback, and he played the best game of his career times like 10. He caught a touchdown. He showed up clutch when it mattered most. He didn't even flinch versus the Patriots defense. And he won the game. He won the game for them. They would not have won this game with Carson Wentz, and I do believe that. I don't think any one quarterback could have played better than Nick Foles in this situation. But in the end, Brady still had a chance to go win the game. But Brandon Graham got a strip sack, and the Eagles won the Super Bowl. The Philadelphia Eagles beat the New England Patriots with a backup quarterback in the Super Bowl. And questions were now being asked. Was the dynasty over? No, it wasn't, but there was a new contender to that throne, and his name is Patrick LeVon Mahomes. Alex Smith, the quarterback for the Chiefs, was traded to Washington, and his successor, Mahomes, was here. And in basically year number 1 in 2018, he was a sophomore, but his first year starting, he broke football in the way that Dan Marino did. He had 5,000 plus yards and 50 touchdowns, winning the MVP. Teams had no answer for the guy, and importantly too, he just played some entertaining football. Combined with Hall of Famers and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, he just was bombing on teams. And specifically, the Rams vs. Chiefs Monday night game was one of the most entertaining games ever. The Rams won it 54-51, but Mahomes had 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. And the craziest part about this season was that Drew fucking Brees, was still right by his side the whole time in the MVP race. He was amazing this season and almost stole the MVP as he set the all-time passing yardage record this year too. The Bears also got Khalil Mack from the Raiders, and they had a dominant defense. They went 12-4, and Cody Parkey happened. Don't even really need to talk about that one. But there were also a lot of new quarterbacks in the league now. Lamar Jackson was a Raven. Baker Mayfield was a Brown. And then he wasn't a Brown, but we'll get there. Josh Allen was on the Bills, and Josh Rosen also was drafted. Yeah, he's... the Cardinals are just fucking... the living embodiment of depression, man. They really are. Anyways, the 2018 playoffs were a mixed bag for sure. All of the games came down to the AFC and NFC championships, which were both shrouded in controversy. The Saints and Rams had probably the worst call in NFL history, or no call specifically, when Nickel Roby-Coleman just absolutely flattened his receiver he was guarding, and no call. There was no call, and the Saints would go on to lose the game in overtime. And in the AFC Championship game, it was a great game. It was the same thing as the Seahawks-Patriots Super Bowl, the old versus the new, Chiefs versus Patriots, but the Patriots were able to hold them off for one more season. However, the game was decided by a Dee Ford offsides call, which negated an interception, and the Patriots won the coin toss in overtime, meaning because of the old rules, Mahomes didn't get a chance to touch the ball, and the Patriots won the game and would go on to the Super Bowl. And the Patriots-Rams Super Bowl was probably one of the worst in terms of entertainment of the last, 30 years. It was pretty bad. Jared Goff was clamped by the Patriots defense. Stephon Gilmore made a game-winning play. And the Patriots just won in a slugfest. It really wasn't all that entertaining. But the dynasty continued, man. They won another Super Bowl. But this would be the end of it. But they tried some ways of keeping it alive in 2019, one of which was bringing in Antonio Brown after he was cut from the Raiders for fucking freezing his feet, showing up in a hot air balloon, calling his boss bad words, lawsuits, blackmailing, and then he took his cock out at a pool. That happened later on. We don't need to get into that. But the dude was just a mess, and he played one game for the Patriots and was cut, and New England was having some issues. But hey, man, this season was basically 2012 all over again. The Ravens and 49ers were on top of the league. Well, and the Chiefs. The Chiefs were good too, but we'll get into that in just a second. Besides that, Jameis Winston had his famous 30-interception, 30-plus touchdown season, so that was very exciting to watch. The Raiders were still shit. The Browns were still shit. You get the picture. But yeah, the 49ers, just like that, rebuilt in a few seasons and now had a roster loaded with more Hall of Famers like Fred Warner, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, and George Kittle, as well as having some of the greatest minds on offense in Kyle Shanahan as their head coach and Robert Saleh as the defensive coordinator. But the Ravens had the unanimous MVP of the NFL in Lamar Jackson, and with pieces brought in like Earl Thomas and Mark Ingram, the Ravens were amazing this season. Lamar had 43 total touchdowns and 1,206 rushing yards as a quarterback, but still, the entire narrative of this season was focused on the New England Patriots, and they kind of fell apart. They started out 8-0, but they lost momentum and ended up in the wild card, where King Henry was hungry. The Titans had also just been having a wild season. They were brewing something, man. After benching Marcus Mariota early on in the season, Ryan Tannehill stepped in and had a Cinderella run for the ages. And the Titans were also coached by former Patriot Mike Vrabel, and they used Derrick Henry as a sledgehammer to upset the defending champs. And they just kept going. They kicked the shit out of Baltimore in the divisional round 2, and the unanimous MVP was knocked out in his first playoff game of the year. And even in the AFC Championship, they gave Kansas City all they could handle before bowing out valiantly. And meanwhile, the Niners just didn't make any game in the NFC close. They just absolutely obliterated the Vikings and the Packers, making it to the Super Bowl. And we got 49ers versus Chiefs, part 1. Now, the Niners just controlled the entire game, honestly, but again, this is still Kyle Shanahan, so it's very important for them to absolutely collapse with a big lead, and Jet Chip Wasp changed everything. On 3rd and long, the Chiefs converted to Tyreek Hill, and momentum was changed. And remember, this was an era of the Chiefs where they could drop 30 in any given quarter, and they did. Jimmy Garoppolo, the 49ers quarterback, just couldn't keep up. He missed Emmanuel Sanders on what could have been a game-winning touchdown, and Damian Williams, a little-known running back for the Chiefs, stole the show. He was amazing in this game, and Kansas City came back, being down in the second half late, to winning the game by 11 points. And the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. And this was, as we now know, the start of a dynasty. But 2020 was one of the weirdest years ever. I said that it was probably the weirdest, up there with 1982 back in the fucking 2 hours ago at this point in this video, but yeah, COVID happened and stadiums were empty for the most part, and we got games on Tuesdays and Wednesdays sometimes. But the 2020 draft is also looking like one of the best ever. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Derek Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor. I could keep going. It was a loaded draft beyond comparison, but there were just so many things going on outside of what was going on in the field itself, as we got a playoff expansion for the first time in forever. There was now a 7th seed, which meant that 2 additional teams would make the playoffs, and also the Commanders finally washed their hands of the Redskins name, and George Marshall's image hopefully was gone forever. It's almost like their owner, Dan Schneider, wanted to keep that name going for a little long. I wonder why. I'm sure he's just an absolute impeccable person. Anyways, yeah, Tom Brady's in Tampa Bay, by the way. Did I mention that? Because the dude was unsure if he wanted to even keep playing football, but here he was in Tampa. The Patriots didn't want him anymore, and the Buccaneers were a perfect team for him to join. They were amazing on defense. They had dogs everywhere and had talent on offense. All they needed was a consistent quarterback, and Tom Brady was that guy. But they were struggling early, but would get it together come January. But the Chiefs were just dominant, and this was arguably their best team ever. They suffered a lot of injuries to their offensive line, which would come back to bite them, but they went 14-2 and were the Super Bowl favorites. Meanwhile, Aaron Rodgers, at 37 years old, was playing ball like 2011 again. He broke efficiency records again. He set his own records and then broke his own records. He threw 48 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, and the Packers went 13-3 under coach Matt LaFleur. And also, I haven't even mentioned Davante Adams yet, but he's one of the best wide receivers of all time, and his connection with Aaron Rodgers was near telepathical. He was one of, if not the best route runners of his era, and no one could cover him one-on-one. But even crazier, man, holy shit, the Browns were good. After a disappointing season where they brought in Odell Beckham, they finally had a good team. Baker Mayfield looked great. They had Myles Garrett, one of the best defensive players of all time, Nick Chubb, and more. And they played the Pittsburgh Steelers in the wild card round, who at one point were 11-0, but yeah, with no crowd, they won the game. The Steelers, like Peyton Manning and the Broncos in the 2013 Super Bowl, lost off of the first fucking snap, which went over Ben's head, and the Browns, they won a playoff game, man. And even better, they actually took the Kansas City Chiefs to the brink of defeat, but a bad no call would end the game, and the Chiefs would go on to the AFC Championship game, and then the Super Bowl. Josh Allen was no match for Mahomes quite yet, but meanwhile in the NFC, the Bucs made it out. Somehow, despite getting punked by the Saints all year, late in the year, Drew Brees' arm just wasn't working anymore. It was really sad to see, but in this game that was marketed as the last between these two legends, it wasn't all that amazing. And a Devin White interception ended the game, and then we got Rodgers versus Brady. It was beautiful. Brady, Brees, and Rodgers were the best 3 teams in the NFC in 2020, but the Bucs won. It was a very, very close game. It was anyone's game, but they just managed to get the plays that mattered most. A Scotty Miller touchdown before the half was huge, and Aaron Rodgers and the Packers fell, meaning the Bucs and Chiefs would play in the Super Bowl again. Mahomes versus Brady, and again, Brady got the upper hand. On paper, in their primes, this Bucs offense was just stupid. Rob Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Tom Brady, but they weren't all in their primes. They were beatable, but the Chiefs were just outmatched, honestly. There were some rough calls early on in the game, but with their offensive line injuries, Mahomes was just sprinting the entire game. Shaq Barrett and the Bucs defense was suffocating. And Tom fucking Brady, bro. How did you do it, bro? With a whole new team, a whole new system, all new teammates in just year number 1 in Tampa, he won the Super Bowl. And undoubtedly, this Super Bowl win cemented him as the best player in NFL history. So, congratulations, Tom. You did it, bro. You did it. So in 2021, the question was, who could compete with the best of the best in the Bucs and the Chiefs? And the Rams threw their hat in the ring, okay? They had Sean McVay still, who was probably the best coach in football, but they needed a quarterback, and they got one in Matthew Stafford. They traded away a treasure trove of picks to the Lions, but they got him. Now, a lot of people believe this trade was terrible, and Stafford was just a stat patter on a bad team, but there was only one way to find out, and soon enough, people would realize, no, yeah, the Lions were just torturing him is really what it was. Stafford is that good. The Bengals also had something going on too. Since getting Joe Burrow back from his 2020 injury, he was phenomenal, and they paired him with his LSU teammate in Jamar Chase, and the two of them were one of the most fun connections in the league, and the Bengals as a whole were a Cinderella story and a half. The Raiders also had the fucking craziest season in modern NFL history, probably. This is a season that will never be replicated again. Our coach was racist and forced to resign. There's a lot of conspiracy baggage there with emails and the Commanders with Bruce Allen, but yeah, that happened. But that was just one of like 8 crazy things that also happened. Henry Ruggs fucking killed someone, which was tragic. Damon Arnett waved his gun on Instagram. Nate Hobbs got a DUI. John Madden passed away, which was also a tragedy. And we all had to rally behind our interim head coach in Rich Bisaccia. And we fucking did. We got to a point where in the final game of the season versus the Chargers, it was a win and get in the playoffs situation. We could have tied too, but fuck the Chargers, and we won the game. And we ended up losing to the Bengals right away in the wild card after a phantom whistle, but you know, that's normal for us at this point. But Rodgers also won another fucking MVP. He was the first MVP repeat since Peyton Manning in 08 and 09, and again he broke efficiency records. 37 touchdowns and 4 picks. Just fucking standard shit for him at this point. I think he's the most talented quarterback to ever play this sport, but could he show up in the playoffs though? That's what everyone wanted to know, and no, he couldn't. He could not step up, and the Packers fell to the Niners again. But we were treated to possibly the greatest divisional round in the history of football. Like I said, the Packers and the Niners played against each other, and San Francisco pulled off a miracle win in the snow. The Bengals and Titans played against each other, and that was an intense game as the Bengals knocked off the number 1 seeded Titans despite Joe Burrow being sacked 9 times. The Bills and Chiefs played an all-time classic game, and the Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes rivalry officially became the new Brady vs. Manning. Both were dropping multiple touchdowns late in the game, but Josh Allen left too much time on the clock. The 13 seconds is apparently too much time for Mahomes and the Chiefs. They forced overtime, and like the Brady-Mahomes AFC Championship game from 3 years prior, the Chiefs won the coin toss and would win the game with a touchdown. And then there was the best game of them all, perhaps. I actually don't think any game is better than Bills-Chiefs, but we got Bucks vs. Rams. And Cooper Kupp, by the way, was just a video game player this season. He had the greatest season by a wide receiver ever. He had a triple crown year, which means he led the league in receiving yards, receptions, and touchdowns, and was even better in the playoffs. But in this game, the Rams had a huge lead, and they almost blew it. They almost let Tom come back, but off of a crazy play from Stafford to Cooper Kupp, the Rams pulled it off and advanced to the NFC Championship game. And in the championship games, the Rams beat the Niners off of a Jaquiski Tartt dropped interception, and the Bengals shocked the Chiefs. Mahomes completely collapsed in the second half, played his worst half of football at the worst time, and this set up some parity. Rams versus Bengals, and it was a great Super Bowl, man. It really was, but the Rams just had too much talent. Aaron Donald was the best player on the field when he was out there, and Matthew Stafford was the best when he was out there. And the Rams got the last laugh. Aaron Donald made a game-winning play, just deciding that no one was going to block him, and the Rams won their first Super Bowl since the greatest show on turf held the Lombardi Trophy some 20 years ago. And now we get into what I would say is the dry years of the NFL, because 2022 was not a very great year, to be honest with you. The Vikings were one of the luckiest teams ever, and they did come back from being down 33-0 to Matt Ryan. Yeah, the guy's just tortured, and they ended up winning the game, but they were just a wildly inconsistent team all year. Really fun, but not very great. Russell Wilson was in Denver now, and he was absolutely terrible, so that wasn't ideal for them. And this season is also remembered for Damar Hamlin's scary situation, where he suffered cardiac arrest after a routine tackle, and he received CPR for about 10 minutes, and the game was canceled, which has never happened before in modern NFL history. And to be honest with you, the playoffs were pretty mid. I mean, it started off insane, with the Jaguars coming back from being down 4 scores, but, you know, it's just average Chargers shit. But the Eagles managed to make the Super Bowl after injuring 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy, and the Chiefs barely beat the Bengals in a rematch, meaning the Super Bowl was the Chiefs versus the Eagles. And it was a great Super Bowl. The Eagles had a great defense again. They rebuilt very, very fast. They have an amazing front office, but this game is spoiled by one singular play. The holding call on James Bradbury would seal the deal for the Eagles. And Kansas City kicked a game-winning field goal and won another Super Bowl. 38 points from the Chiefs offense. Patrick Mahomes played great. Jalen Hurts also played great, but it's the little plays that decide it. And the Chiefs dynasty had arrived. And by 2023, everything just felt like a dystopia. Taylor Swift was dating Travis Kelce, and there were some crazy things going on across the league. Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins, who had Tyreek Hill now, were absolutely popping off, and what do you mean the Lions were good? What? Yeah, Dan Campbell is their head coach now, and alongside Ben Johnson, they were fucking shit up. With the picks that they got from the Matthew Stafford trade, they had gotten so much talent from it. Amon-Ra was here, Aiden Hutchinson would blossom eventually, Jahmyr Gibbs, and more, and they were amazing and would go on to win the division with 12 wins. The Packers also now had Jordan Love. Aaron Rodgers was no longer there, and instead was a New York Jet. He was following the same career path as his predecessor, Brett Favre, but he ended up tearing his Achilles in his first game, so yeah, that happened. Also, the Browns had a crazy, crazy ending to their season as they rallied around Joe fucking Flacco, but after clinching the playoffs versus the Jets, they would lose to the Houston Texans in the wildcard round, who were led by a rookie sensation, CJ Stroud, which, geez, man, doesn't it feel like CJ Stroud's rookie season was like 8 years ago? It's crazy, bro. Crazy. Anyways, the usual teams were good, though. The Chiefs, Niners, and Ravens. And the playoffs were kind of okay, again, I guess. I don't know. Stafford lost to the Lions. The Cowboys got obliterated by the Packers. Standard stuff. And in the NFC Championship game, the Lions... The Bobby Lane curse, man, it doesn't go away. I don't know how you can look at this game and tell me the Lions aren't cursed. They dropped 8 passes in a row, failed multiple fourth downs. Brandon Ayuk caught a touchdown off of a dropped pick, and the Niners advanced to the Super Bowl, where they would face the Kansas City Chiefs, who were not a very good team this season, honestly, but they ended up beating the Ravens somehow. Their defense was amazing, though. Chris Jones, L'Jarius Sneed was in his prime, Trent McDuffie, and Sneed himself iced the game versus the Ravens after a punch on Zay Flowers, and Lamar Jackson fell short again. He was inheriting the Peyton Manning choking narrative, and that is still with him to this day. So we got 49ers versus Chiefs Part 2, and boy am I excited to talk about this game. Actually, just give me a second here. Give me a moment. You know, I won't elaborate on how this piece of equipment has managed to get into my possession, but we got the signed, autographed Mecole Hardman touchdown. I am a Raiders fan, for those of you that know, but for those of you diehards, you also know why I have that. I won't comment on that any further, and yes, it's signed by Mecole Hardman himself. Anyways, yeah, so the Chiefs were not a very good team, and they didn't look great to start this game either. And to finish it, honestly, it was Mahomes and nobody, but the Niners managed to just get in their own way again. It's the Kyle Shanahan special, and after a fumbled punt off of a fraction of an ankle, the Chiefs got a chance to score, took it, and ended up just hanging around long enough to compete. And Chris Jones got a stop for the Chiefs when they needed it, and Mahomes took the team down the field, and with an offense led by a senile Travis Kelce, a rookie Rashee Rice, and nobody, he beat a team with 6 Hall of Famers in their prime. And the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty won another Super Bowl, and they were not going anywhere. And in 2024, we're at a point where things are just getting ridiculous. The Chiefs were even worse of a team than they were in 2023, but they just kept finding a fucking way. They won nearly every game by 1 possession, but they were nowhere near the best team. Philly was still here, but Jalen Hurts had new toys. They had A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, but now they also had Saquon Barkley, who was freed from the New York Giants shithouse, and Kellen Moore, their offensive coordinator, was having a great time with that, as Saquon had a historic season and had a chance to break Eric Dickerson's 2,000-yard record, but he ended up resting a bit to end the season. Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball was absolutely terrorizing quarterbacks with young pieces like Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, Cooper DeJean, and Quinyon Mitchell. They were just a team with zero weaknesses, and turns out that's what makes you the best team in the league. The NFC North was also loaded as the Lions, Vikings, and Packers were going at each other's throats, but somehow none of them won a playoff game, and Jaden Daniels and the Commanders went all the way to the NFC Championship. They upset the Lions, but honestly, besides the Commanders' crazy run, this was a bit of a mid-playoffs. The divisional round was fine, nothing crazy. The Bills beat the Ravens on a Mark Andrews drop 2-point conversion, but the Eagles embarrassed the Commanders and made the Super Bowl, while the Chiefs somehow beat the Bills again. Josh Allen fell short to Mahomes in the playoffs once more, which meant the Chiefs and Eagles would face off in the Super Bowl. And a lot of America got the retribution that they felt was deserved for the Chiefs. The black magic could not continue and the world rejoiced. The Eagles made quick work of the Chiefs and dropped 40 on them. They had 95 points in 2 games, those games being the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. And at this point, the Chiefs dynasty still has a pulse, but Philly's going to be the team to beat for a long time. Or maybe not, because Kevin Patullo is here and he is a fucking shithead. The Eagles completely collapsed this season, and just like they did in 2023, were eliminated right away in the wild card, this time by the 49ers infirmary, and that was one of the biggest wastes of talent in NFL history. But this year was an absolute crazy season for parity. The Ravens were not very good. The Chiefs were not very good. The Bengals weren't good. They all missed the playoffs, and instead, Bo Nix and the Broncos rose. Trevor Lawrence, with Liam Cohen as the new head coach, were popping off. And the New England Patriots with Drake May, the sophomore sensation who would finish second in MVP voting, won the AFC and made it all the way to the Super Bowl. Just a crazy season from them. But even they had to deal with a wild gauntlet to get to the Super Bowl. They played against the Chargers defense, the Texans defense, and Denver, all with wins for New England. So just a crazy year for the Patriots, and aren't you proud, Tom? Aren't you proud that they got all the way back? He doesn't care at all, honestly. He really doesn't give a shit. But in NFC land, nobody really knew who was going to come out before the season. If it wasn't going to be the Eagles, then who was it? Was it the Bears, who had Ben Johnson as their head coach, who was developing Caleb Williams very well? Possibly. Was it the Rams, or Niners, or Seahawks? All three were in the same division and were competing for the top spot in the NFC all season long? Well, probably. And the answer to that question would be the Seahawks. The Niners probably would have been the best team in the league if they were all healthy, but that didn't happen. Their entire team fucking died, and they got fed to the Wolves versus the Seahawks in the divisional round, which set up the NFC Championship game, which was basically the Super Bowl, the Seahawks versus the Rams. And Seattle just barely pulled it off of just a few mistakes by the Rams special team specifically, and the Seahawks and Patriots were set up for a revenge game of Super Bowl 49. All right, so I'm gonna be honest. I think I recorded the rest of this video in like maybe early February, January, if that. And here I am in April, and I am going to be filling in because I recorded the beginning of this section before the Super Bowl had even happened. And now the Super Bowl has happened, and what do you know? It was an utter dominating performance by the Seattle Seahawks. Drake May could not do anything all game long. It was just destruction from the first snap to the last. The Seahawks' dark side defense just was clamping up everything. Drake May could not have more than 2 seconds in the pocket. They were getting pressure on him. All of his receivers were getting locked down one-on-one. And meanwhile, Sam Darnold did it. He completed his redemption arc and was holding a Lombardi Super Bowl trophy at the end of the 2025 season. Again, Sam Darnold won the fucking Super Bowl. It was just a magical, magical season. And one of my favorites in NFL history. But yeah, I guess that's it. I guess that's all of NFL history. From the early 1900s to 2026. All of it. All of this video took like months and months to complete, so I'd really appreciate it if you could like subscribe or thumbs up or something, or, you know, at least leave a nice comment. I like it. I swear I'm a human. I really appreciate all the nice comments out there. It really means so much to me. But I just hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you actually got to the end of this video, if you're listening to me talking about this right now, that's just crazy to me, because like I said, I literally recorded this video over the span of like 3 months. Like, I started making this video before the Super Bowl, so yeah, I really appreciate you getting to this point, and hopefully I provided you a good, like, little bedtime video. But yeah, anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I don't really have videos on the channel like this one, but I do a lot of deep dives. So if you like this video, then watch this video I did specifically on the Patriots dynasty. It's pretty good, trust me. And thank you to all my Patrons and members so much for pledging tiers. It truly does mean a lot. But anyways, till next time.